Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales. Chapter 2633, Monsters, those levels. How is this possible? Are they monsters? At this moment, let alone Mythology's members, even Violet Sword's members were stunned to see the levels of Zero Wing's members. Currently, even the peak experts of the various superpowers had reached only level 113 or level 114. However, even the lowest leveled Zero Wing member present was at level 117, far ahead of the superpowers' peak experts. Team leader Sandstorm, all of them have fully unlocked their mana bodies. Moreover, their equipment standards are quite high, especially for those melee players. I'm afraid we'll need a lot of time and resources to kill them. If Violet Sword side manages to free up some manpower in the meantime, we'll be in danger, a Tier 3 Berserker from Mythology warned Sandstorm as he looked at the 100+ Zero Wing members before them. Although the team leaders on their team had all fully unlocked their mana bodies, no one else on the team had. They only had the assistance of a battle array. However, even if they possessed superior basic attributes to Zero Wing's members, they definitely wouldn't be superior by much, judging by the equipment standard of Zero Wing's members. If it came down to a fight, they wouldn't have much of an advantage even in a one-on-one fight. Not to mention, their team only had 30-odd members, whereas Zero Wing's side had more than 100 players. Overall, they were at a complete disadvantage. Damn it! You guys retreat! Sandstorm ordered, his complexion darkening as he gazed at Zero Wing's members. He then turned to the female guardian knight beside him and said, "Feather, you and the other team leaders continue fighting. We'll kill as many as we can. Retreat as soon as Crimson Star's group finishes activating the teleportation gate." "Got it," replied the female guardian knight named White Feather, unopposed to Sandstorm's decision. Team leaders like herself and Sandstorm currently possessed power at the Tier 4 standard. With the assistance of the battle array, their basic attributes were far superior to those of Zero Wing's members. Out of the Zero Wing members present, only Xiaofan could actually put them in a bind. However, if the 5 of them split up and took action independently, they could slaughter quite a few of Zero Wing's members. Moreover, they had already used the precious magic devouring gemstones for the operation. If they still failed to produce any results, they would definitely be punished. Obedient to Sandstorm's command, everyone from Mythology, aside from the 5 team leaders, promptly turned around and fled. However, as soon as Mythology's members took flight, a clear and crisp voice entered everyone's ears. "Don't even think of getting away so easily." In the next moment, a magic array rapidly spread out from beneath Zhao Yueru's feet, summoning a barrier of flames. Covering a 500-yard radius around Zhao Yueru, the barrier trapped all of Mythology's members within it. "Bastard!" Sandstorm bellowed in rage when he saw the barrier of flames rise. He immediately charged straight at Zhao Yueru, his movement speed astonishing Violet Sword's members. Sandstorm was at least twice as fast as the assassin leader that attacked Crimson Star's group earlier. In the blink of an eye, he appeared over 50 yards from his original location. "Everyone, be careful. He's already capable of perfectly integrating advanced footwork into his movement skill. Do not clash with him directly." Wildfighter warned, a grim expression appearing on his face at Sandstorm's astonishing speed. Among the various types of combat techniques available, the most difficult type to integrate with skills and spells was footwork. Integrating footwork with a movement skill was especially challenging. Even in Violet Sword, only a few individuals were capable of this. Anyone who achieved this integration could freely weave their way through an army of tens of thousands. Not to mention, Sandstorm's basic attributes were currently at the Tier 4 standard. With the combination of his speed and strength, he was basically unstoppable. In just 3 seconds, Sandstorm penetrated Zero Wing's defensive line and arrived behind Zhao Yueru. He then executed a downward slash at the elementalist's back using the silver short sword he wielded. "Die, you hindrance!" Sandstorm bellowed. Immediately, mana gathered around his short sword and coalesced into a great sword that left a dark void in its wake. Just when the great sword was about to land on Zhao Yueru, however, a lithe figure suddenly appeared beside the elementalist and sent a sword light cutting at the great sword. Boom! A loud explosion shook the battlefield, and the space surrounding the point of collision shattered into oblivion. The resulting shockwave sent all the players within a 10-yard radius of the explosion's epicenter flying. Impossible! She blocked it? White Feather, who was watching from a distance, doubted her eyes when she saw Gentle Snow stopping Sandstorm's attack. Although Sandstorm was an assassin, he had been drastically strengthened by the magic-devouring gemstone and the advanced battle array. His current strength far exceeded that of ordinary mythic monsters of the same level. With the boost in power his Tier 3 skill provided, his attack should be capable of repulsing even bona fide mythic monsters. However, despite being merely a Tier 3 player, Gentle Snow had actually managed to receive the attack without losing any ground. A special skill? Sandstorm muttered. Although he was similarly surprised that Gentle Snow stopped his attack, he quickly realized the reason why she was able to do so. I don't know what skill you used to stop my attack, but since it is a skill and not a combat technique, you'll only be able to stop me once. I refuse to believe you can continue stopping me. After saying so, Sandstorm readied himself to launch another attack. However, as if Gentle Snow had long anticipated this, she intercepted him, executing 4 attacks with her great sword. Will of Light. 4 extreme slashes. Boom! 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 Sandstorm quickly responded to Gentle Snow's intervention, rapidly brandishing his short sword to defend against the 4 slashes. Every attack he blocked sent him stumbling 1 step back. Are you done using your skill yet? Although Sandstorm was forced to retreat by 4 steps, he still maintained a calm expression. He then smirked and said, "If you're done, it's my turn now." However, just as Sandstorm finished speaking, Gentle Snow raised Glorious Will above her head. At the same time, her body started releasing a sacred glow that suppressed even the space around her. Disappear! Gentle Snow shouted as she swung Glorious Will down at Sandstorm. A boundless light devoured Sandstorm. Myth of Light. With just 1 attack, Gentle Snow obliterated everything before her within 100 yards. Even space itself shattered. As for Sandstorm, he went flying over 100 yards away, his HP falling below 50% and his body covered in injuries. When he hit the ground, the impact created a huge crater. Upon seeing this scene, everyone present was astonished. Violet Swords and Mythology's members, in particular, could not help gaping in shock. Just how many cards does Zero Wing have hidden? Crimson Star wondered aloud as she stared at Gentle Snow. First, it was Xiaofan. Now, it was Gentle Snow. Gentle Snow was clearly only at the Void Realm standard. In terms of basic attributes, she had to be quite inferior to Sandstorm. Moreover, Sandstorm had also fully unlocked his mana body already. The only advantage she had was her level of 118. No matter how Crimson Star looked at it, Gentle Snow shouldn't be a match for Sandstorm. In the end, however, Gentle Snow had used only a few moves to topple Sandstorm. The power of her final attack, in particular, practically rivaled that of the attack Xiaofan used to deal with the 2 region chiefs. Feather, what should we do? Sandstorm is already heavily injured. There's still Sinful Flame on Azure's side. With just the 4 of us, I'm afraid we'll have difficulty accomplishing anything, the Tier 3 elementalist standing beside White Feather asked when he saw Sandstorm struggling even to stand up right now. With the situation as it was, they wouldn't gain anything from continuing this fight. Out of the 5 team leaders taking part in this operation, Sandstorm was the strongest while White Feather came second. Now that Sandstorm was heavily injured and occupied in battle, it was up to White Feather to take charge. We retreat. Zero Wing's strength exceeds our expectations. We need to report this matter to the Vice Commander as soon as possible. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, but what about the fire barrier? The Tier 3 Elementalist asked as he looked at the barrier of flame surrounding them. If I use my trump card, I should be able to shatter it. Once it's gone, have everyone retreat at full speed. White Feather instructed. Alright. I'll have them scatter and run, the Tier 3 Elementalist said, nodding. Following which, White Feather shattered Zhao Yueru's barrier of flames with a single move. She and Mythology's other members then scattered and fled. As for Zero Wing's members, they persistently hunted down Mythology's members. In the end, they killed not only 20+ of Mythology's peak experts but also Sandstorm and 2 other team leaders, inflicting severe losses on Mythology's Silver Light Legion. Word of this battle also quickly spread throughout Violet Light City, shaking all those who heard it. Chuckling, he continued, since Zero Wing wants to become famous, we'll fulfill their wish. Notify the ones below and have them publicize this information. I believe plenty of superpowers and major corporations will be interested in Zero Wing's secret for unlocking the mana body. Vice Commander, although the other superpowers will definitely be interested in this secret, if we don't make a move ourselves, I'm afraid no superpower will be willing to take action against Zero Wing. In the end, everyone will simply sit back and watch Zero Wing develop, White Feather said worriedly. Relax. Soon, we'll be done with the task the demon god assigned us. At that time, the kingdoms and empires on the continent will no longer serve as a protective shield for the various powers. Meanwhile, with how much resources Zero Wing is occupying, it will become the common target of the superpowers. We won't need to make a move at all, Prosciutto said, smiling. That quest is almost complete? White Feather's eyes glowed with excitement when she heard Prosciutto's words. There were 2 crucial quests available in the Demon God's Shrine, and the completion of either of them could kick up a storm throughout the Western continent. Mythology had chosen to challenge one of those quests. Originally, though, she thought that they would need a lot more time to complete it. If they really completed that quest, then even if Zero Wing cleared the ancient Secret Lands hero trial, it would be meaningless. The only outcome awaiting Zero Wing would be destruction. Alright, go make the necessary preparations to publicize Zero Wing's information. Also, send someone to the Eastern Continent to notify Vice Guild leader Cold Shadow about the quest's progress. She should know how to deal with Zero Wing, Prosciutto commanded. Understood. White Feather replied before leaving the meeting room. News of Zero Wing having over 100 experts with fully unlocked mana bodies spread across the entire Western continent, instantly garnering great fame for Zero Wing. At the same time, though, the Western continent's powers also grew jealous of Zero Wing and started coveting its secrets. The guild immediately became the focal point of the Western continent as the various powers began investigating it. As Zero Wing's fame was spreading across the Western continent, Crimson Star was leading Xiaofan and the others into the hero trial. After everyone walked through the teleportation gate and arrived inside the trial grounds, they immediately fell silent. An indescribably solemn expression also appeared on their faces. The reason for this was the intense gravity in the trial grounds. The moment they entered, it felt as if several 100 kilograms had been added to their bodies. Now, let alone fighting, even walking normally was a challenge. In addition, the tunnel they were currently standing in was incomparably dark, which hampered their vision greatly. In fact, aside from their sense of sight, the rest of their 5 senses were also significantly blunted. Now, they felt as if the standard of their 5 senses wasn't even on par with the 5 senses of Tier 1 players. The worst part of it all was the tens of thousands of humanoid monsters ahead of them. Aside from being fully geared in armor, these humanoid monsters also held longswords and carried longbows on their backs. Looking at this scene, everyone could not help feeling that they had just entered an ancient battlefield. Trial Warrior, Dark Creature, Great Lord, Level 120 HP 100 00000/100 0000000. Trial Elite, Dark Creature, Grand Lord, Level 121 HP 430 00000/430 0000000. However, before everyone could digest the information before them, the sound of system notifications entered their ears. System, you have discovered the hero trial space. System, hero trial activated. You have 5 natural days to complete the trial. You will be awarded based on the trial's completion rate. 5 days? How can we possibly get through so many monsters in just 5 days? Floating Light suspected that the system was toying with them when he stared at the endless trial warriors and trial elites before him. The monsters in this trial space were ordinary monsters, which normally wouldn't pose much of a threat to the experts on their team. However, that was in the outside world. Inside the trial space, their physical bodies and 5 senses were heavily suppressed. Even a domain realm expert like himself could barely exhibit 30% of his normal combat power under such a suppression. At this moment, he would have great trouble fighting the trial warriors in a one-on-one situation, let alone the trial elites. Meanwhile, there was only one path in this trial space, so there was no way they could avoid the trial warriors and trial elites entirely. The only way to get to the trial boss was to kill these monsters and gradually carve out a path. Meanwhile, when Crimson Star and Wild Fighter, who had started growing optimistic of success after witnessing Zero Wing's strength, saw this scene, they were likewise stunned. Not only are the monsters here numerous, but they are also positioned very close together. Even if we lure just one of them, I'm afraid we'll end up luring several thousand. In addition, all of these monsters are capable of ranged attacks. Let alone fighting, even dodging their attacks would be a problem. Wild Fighter frowned at the trial warriors and trial elites that filled the tunnel before him. Although he had long known that the hero trial would be difficult, he never thought that it would be this difficult. With their bodies so heavily suppressed, if they tried fighting several thousand of these monsters simultaneously, they would definitely be honeycombed in no time. Look closer, the weapons of those monsters are enchanted with the penetrating effect. Not to mention other melee players, even MTs won't be able to tank more than a handful of those monsters. The slightest mistake would mean death. Although I have some spells that can stop a portion of the ranged attacks, there are simply too many monsters. The help I can provide will be negligible, Crimson Star said, a bitter smile forming on her face as she pointed at the trial elite's weapons. Our only option is to have our ranged players kite the monsters and whittle away their numbers. However, if we do that, killing all these monsters in just 5 days will be utterly impossible. Upon hearing Crimson Star's words, Duan Hanshan and the other experts from the Azure Chamber of Commerce also nodded in agreement. Any melee expert that hadn't reached the Void Realm would get slaughtered if they tried going up against more than a handful of these trial monsters by themselves. However, their team simply had too few peak experts. They couldn't form a frontline capable of effectively holding off the trial monsters. Their only option was to have the ranged players kite the monsters and have the melee players repel any monsters that got too close for comfort. However, while this strategy was very safe, the efficiency was abysmal. Vice Commander Crimson, you say can block a portion of the ranged attacks? Xiaofan asked after giving the matter some thought. Yes. I can block roughly 20% to 30% of the ranged attacks. However, there are simply too many monsters here. Against the attacks of several thousand monsters, even if I manage to block 30%, it will do little to no good for those dodging the attacks, Crimson Star said, nodding. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ew, if you can block that much, then there shouldn't be any problem, Xiaofan said after making some mental calculations. Afterward, my side will stand at the front and attract the monsters' attacks. Everyone else just has to attack with everything you've got. We should be able to get to the trial boss within the stipulated time. You'll attract the attacks? Crimson Star was stunned by Xiaofan's words. She simply couldn't understand why Xiaofan didn't consider this a problem. These were the simultaneous attacks of several thousand monsters they were talking about. Moreover, some of these monsters even had weapons with enhanced penetrative effects. Not to mention, in this horrible environment, even peak experts would have difficulty evading the attacks of the trial monsters, let alone Zero Wings members, who were mainly at the refinement realm standard. However, before Crimson Star and the others could react to Xiaofan's proposal, the swordsman had already commanded Zero Wings 100+ experts to take action. And these Zero Wing members immediately charged at the nearby trial warriors and trial elites without the slightest bit of hesitation. Chapter 2635, A Stroll Through the Backyard? Upon seeing Zero Wings members dash straight toward the nearest group of trial monsters, Violet Swords and Azure's members gaped in shock. They were going up against several thousand monsters here. Moreover, even the weakest of these monsters was a level 120 Great Lord, yet Xiaofan didn't even bother to discuss positioning and individual assignments before having Zero Wings members charge straight into battle. This was the first time Violet Swords and Azure's members had seen such leadership. To make matters worse, every one of Zero Wings members actually obeyed Xiaofan's command. This is just too reckless. Wildfighter could not help feeling anxious when he saw Xiaofan proceeding with utter disregard for their opinions. There are several thousand monsters. Even if they have fully unlocked mana bodies and can take some hits, if they can't dodge attacks, they'll still end up dead. He admitted that Zero Wings members were very high-leveled. In addition, every one of them also had a fully unlocked mana body. Zero Wings members definitely had a greater advantage when going up against the trial monsters than Violet Swords peak experts did. However, the system was clearly trying to test players' combat standards in this tunnel. Levels and fully unlocked mana bodies were only secondary. Currently, they were already tight for time because the trial duration was only 5 days instead of the expected 7 days. If they died here and lost a day's worth of progress, they definitely wouldn't be able to complete the trial. We have no choice but to go along with them, Crimson Star sighed when she saw Zero Wings members getting close to the nearest group of trial monsters. I'll activate my magic array in a moment. Everyone else, focus fire on the trial elites. So long as we reduce the number of penetrating attacks we have to deal with, we can stop the remaining trial monsters much more easily. Sinful Flame and the other members of Azure nodded in agreement with Crimson Star's plan before charging toward the nearest trial elite. They intended to get rid of a few trial elites as soon as the battle between both sides started, so that they could lessen the pressure on Zero Wings members and minimize casualties. The instant Zero Wings members entered the trial monsters' perception range, the trial warriors and trial elites promptly sprang into action like veterans of the battlefield. In no time at all, 400 trial warriors spread out into a square formation around the main army. They then stabbed the iron shields they carried into the ground, creating an iron wall that protected the several thousand other trial monsters within their formation. As for the trial monsters inside the square formation, they unslung their bows, split up into several divisions, and fired arrows at Zero Wings members in intervals. This scene stunned Violet Swords and Azure's members momentarily. They had seen monsters attacking as an orderly group before, but this was definitely their first time seeing monsters attacking in such a well-trained fashion. In fact, the coordination of these trial monsters rivaled that of NPCs. Volleys of arrows rained down on Zero Wings members, each volley consisting of more than 1,000 arrows. Moreover, the intervals between the volleys were incredibly short. The arrows in each volley were also well spaced, leaving no room for Zero Wings members to exploit. It's over. Even peak experts will have difficulty dodging and blocking all those arrows. With the combat standards of Zero Wings members, several volleys would be enough to annihilate them, Wildfighter's complexion darkened significantly when he saw the spate of arrows bombarding Zero Wings members. Against such a coordinated and accurate assault, let alone Zero Wings members, even a group of peak experts wouldn't survive for very long. Although the attack pattern was very monotonous, the arrows flew incredibly fast. In addition, they came in torrents. There was a limit to the number of actions and reactions a person could make within a certain period. Over this limit, even domain realm experts would be rendered powerless and could only watch as they got killed. Although these arrows didn't carry a lot of power, they still weren't attacks players like themselves could afford to receive casually. At this moment, every one of Zero Wings members would have to go up against at least 10 arrows simultaneously, with some unlucky ones having to go up against as many as 20. After factoring in the speed of the arrows, these numbers had already exceeded the limits of even Tier 3 peak experts. Only domain realm experts would be able to accurately determine the trajectories of these arrows and react to them in time. Just when the first volley of arrows was about to land on Zero Wings members, a voice appeared in the team chat. Vice Commander Crimson, activate your defensive magic array. Xiaofan ordered unhurriedly as he looked at the descending arrows. Got it. Upon hearing Xiaofan's command, Crimson Star snapped out of her daze and waved her staff, completing the activation of the magic array she had prepared beforehand. A silver barrier bloomed from the center of Zero Wings formation, instantly expanding to cover a 200-yard radius and enveloping all of Zero Wings members within it. Tier 3 Curse, Aerial Defense. Aerial Defense was a curse that had a certain probability of invalidating the flying tools within its range. It was similarly effective against arrows. In the next moment, more than 20% of the first arrow volley clattered to the ground. Now, only about 900 arrows continued flying toward Zero Wings members. Even so, Violet Swords and Azure's members still wore grim expressions on their faces. Although the number of arrows had been reduced to around 900, the number of attacks each of Zero Wings members had to face still exceeded the limit of peak experts, let alone refinement realm experts. As Violet Swords and Azure's members were shaking their heads and sighing, Zero Wings members started maneuvering around the arrows, dodging them effortlessly as if they had long since known the trajectories of these arrows. From afar, it seemed as if Zero Wings members were dancing in a rain of arrows. When the first volley of arrows ended, not a single Zero Wing member had suffered a direct hit. While some Zero Wing members had lost roughly a quarter of their HP, that was merely a result of them defending against the Trial Elite's penetrating arrows. The HP they lost was also instantly replenished by the healers on the team. How is that possible? Floating Light's eyes bulged when he saw this scene. Against that volley of arrows, even he wouldn't have such an easy time blocking and defending. However, Zero Wings members had dealt with the volley of arrows as if they were just strolling through their backyard. At this moment, let alone Floating Light, even Solitary Frost and Yan Xiaoqian, who had trained with Zero Wings members for the past few days, were astonished by this scene. Despite the majority of Zero Wings members being only at the refinement realm, they had easily dealt with an attack that even peak experts would find troublesome. This was simply unbelievable. They can actually block and dodge that kind of attack so easily? Just what kind of training do they normally undergo? Yan Xiaoqian's heart roiled with confusion as she looked at Zero Wings refinement realm experts. What Yan Xiaoqian and the others did not know was that Zero Wings core members had long since familiarized themselves with attacks like the Trial Monster's arrow attacks. After all, they faced much worse when they were training at the Extraordinary Tower's first floor. In fact, in the opinions of Zero Wings members, blocking and dodging the Trial Monster's arrow attacks would still be a cakewalk even without Crimson Star support. After enduring several volleys of arrows, Xiaofan noticed that all of the agitated Trial Monsters had shifted their attention to Zero Wings members. He then ordered through the team chat, "We've stabilized the aggro. Everyone, start attacking." Upon hearing Xiaofan's command, Violet Swords and Azure's members snapped out of their daze and started launching attacks at the trial monsters, together with Zero Wings members. Because Zero Wings members were holding aggro, everyone else could attack freely without having to worry about getting attacked themselves. As a result, the trial monsters fell rapidly, one after another. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, everyone discovered that these trial monsters granted a surprisingly large amount of EXP, basically 3 times higher than normal. Chapter 2636, Beginning of Chaos. Xiaofan aside, the sudden appearance of the crystal steel surprised everyone else present and piqued their curiosity. They never thought that the trial monsters, which had not dropped a single item until now, would actually drop a steel. What an amazing steel! It's causing the ambient mana density to skyrocket just by hovering there. Even the surrounding space has become heavier. Crimson Star exclaimed when she registered the changes the crystal steel brought to its environs. If a Tier 2 player were here, they wouldn't even be able to approach it. In regard to this situation, though, Violet Swords members could not help a little disappointment. Even a fool could tell that the crystal steel was extraordinary. However, according to the agreement between Zero Wing and Violet Sword, aside from the trial boss's loot, every other discovery made and loot found in the trial would belong to Zero Wing. Hence, they could only look at the steel. What is this steel? Not only can it not be appraised, but you can't even touch it. It's as if this steel doesn't exist in this space, Aqua Rose said with a gloomy expression on her face as she stood before the steel. Could it be a holographic projection? This crystal steel was incredibly precious. Even if they couldn't appraise it and discover its uses, they could still set it up inside a room to increase the room's mana density. This room could then be used as a training facility for players. However, if this treasure was merely a hologram, then it can't even serve as a decoration. This isn't a hologram. It's just that we can't touch it, Xiaofan said, smiling. Guild leader, you're still in the mood for jokes? If we can't touch it, then we can only look at this steel and nothing more, Aqua Rose said anxiously when she saw Xiaofang's nonchalant attitude toward this situation. In God's domain, the prerequisite for players to store an item in their bag space was for them to come into physical contact with the target item. If they couldn't touch the steel, how were they supposed to take it away? Looking at it is indeed our only option, Xiaofan said, nodding while smiling. This steel isn't an item that can be taken away. The only thing we can take away is the information recorded on it. The existence of ancient legacy steels was still foreign to the current players of God's domain because these steels appeared only in ancient ruins or secret lands. In the past, the discovery of an ancient legacy steel would always trigger a storm of bloodshed. This was because ancient legacy steels recorded the lost technology of ancient civilization. Any guild that managed to get their hands on this technology could undergo a qualitative transformation. In Xiaofang's previous life, a total of 5 ancient legacy steels had appeared in God's domain. Eventually, the number of monsters the team faced each time had grown so high that even Zero Wings members started feeling taxed. As a result, the team's speed of advance slowed. Fortunately, fighting inside this trial ground was akin to taking part in an intense training session. Everyone's combat standard increased as they fought the trial monsters. Moreover, the EXP everyone obtained was incredibly generous. In just 2 short days, everyone had gained a little more than a level. Aqua Rose and the other members of Zero Wing had already reached level 119, whereas Violet Swords and Azure's members were now at level 114. Crimson Star and Wildfighter were just 30% away from level 115. The leveling speed here astonished Crimson Star and the others. As everyone's motivation was increasing, a series of system announcements suddenly entered their ears. God's Domain System Announcement: some players have triggered the new expansion pack Demon God's Chaos. God's Domain System Announcement: the new expansion pack Demon God's Chaos will activate in 1 natural day. At that time, all non-NPC towns and cities will no longer receive the protection of NPC kingdoms and empires. Everyone inside the trial space gasped and they heard the system announcement. On the surface, this new expansion pack might not seem like it would affect players in any way, but everyone present understood that it would usher in a new era in God's domain. Currently, aside from level 100+ maps, all guild towns and cities established in maps below level 100 came under the aegis of NPC kingdoms and empires. If these guild towns and cities suddenly lost this protection, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all, most guild towns and guild cities relied on the NPCs they employed from the various NPC kingdoms and empires to maintain security. Without this layer of security, players could take action inside guild towns and cities much more freely. The chaos that would befall the various guild towns and cities at that time would go without saying. Aside from maintaining security, defending against siege attacks would also become much more difficult. In other words, the activation of the Demon God's Chaos expansion pack would thoroughly change the structure of God's domain. Without the threat of NPCs, many powers would most likely make a move against their rivals. Outside the ancient secret land, chaos had already ensued. Good. Wonderful. Let's see how those local powers are going to continue protecting their resource spots without those troublesome NPC guards. I don't know who activated this expansion pack, but those people have really given us dark powers a shot in the arm. Now that those NPCs are gone, no one can stop us now. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The powers that were secretly developing themselves in the various kingdoms and empires started growing excited and restless. As for the superpowers, they promptly held meetings to draft countermeasures for the expansion pack's activation. Meanwhile, as the entire God's domain was in chaos, Xiaofan slowly stood up from in front of the ancient legacy stele inside the ancient secret land. Finally, success. Xiaofan smiled when he saw the stele before him gradually fading out of existence. He then started drawing the magic arrays he memorized, which released a frightening aura that shook even the surrounding space. Chapter 2637, Astonishing Memory Crystal. The commotion caused by the ancient legacy stele was huge. Even Crimson Star and the others, who were resting over 3,000 yards away, sensed the unusual mana fluctuation from the stele. Did something happen over there? This mana fluctuation rivals what Tier 5 NPCs cause when using Tier 5 spells, Crimson Star exclaimed as she turned toward the mana fluctuation's origin, horror coloring her eyes. Isn't that guild leader Black Flame's current location? Did something happen to him? Wildfighter similarly revealed a serious expression on his face when he felt the intense mana fluctuation. Tier 5 NPCs were existences that stood at the apex of God's domain. The Tier 5 spells used by these NPCs could wreak great devastation. Before such spells, Tier 3 players like themselves wouldn't even be able to put up the slightest bit of resistance. Everyone present would be instantly killed. Meanwhile, all sorts of dangers filled this trial space. The trial monsters weren't the only threat here. There were also plenty of traps and dangerous events that occurred at random. An ambush by a Tier 5 spell was well within the range of possibilities. If something really happened to Xiaofan, then it would deal a huge blow to the entire team. After all, their team revolved around Xiaofan. Even though the experts on the team understood that Aqua Rose was the person leading them all this time, if he disappeared, many of those experts would most likely question her leadership. In this situation, Aqua Rose had to contact Xiaofan immediately. "Guild leader, is everything alright on your side?" Aqua Rose asked worriedly. Currently, nobody was more anxious than she was about this sudden mana fluctuation. She knew that Xiaofan was under the demon god's curse, which tripled his death penalty. Meanwhile, players inside the trial space could only wait to get automatically resurrected. Hence, if an ordinary player needed 1 day to get automatically resurrected, then Xiaofan would need 3 days. If he died right now, then their odds of clearing the hero trial would become even slimmer. Relax, everything's fine. I just unlocked the information recorded on the stele, Xiaofan said, smiling when he saw the anxious look on Aqua Rose's face. Unlocking the information actually caused such a huge commotion. Aqua Rose was stunned when she heard Xiaofan's words. This was definitely the strongest mana fluctuation she had experienced in God's domain. If this mana fluctuation were due to a spell, she wouldn't be surprised if it destroyed an entire NPC city. However, Xiaofan was telling her that this frightening mana fluctuation was merely a consequence of unlocking the recorded information on the stele. This was simply unbelievable. This is information left behind by an ancient god. It is naturally extraordinary. However, I still need some time to complete the unlocking process. For now, continue clearing the trial monsters on your side. I'll meet up with you once I'm done, Xiaofan explained and chuckled. In reality, the mana fluctuation had surprised even Xiaofan. From what he knew about ancient legacy steles, the strength of the mana fluctuation when the recorded information was unlocked was an indicator of the recorded information's value. Generally, though, the mana fluctuations that occurred extended only 1 or 2,000 yards. Now, however, the mana fluctuation from this ancient legacy stele reached Aqua Rose's location, roughly 3,000 yards away. It rivaled the ancient legacy stele found in the ancient god's tomb, a level 150+ ancient secret land. However, the ancient god's tomb's minimum entry requirement was tier 4. Alright, I'll notify the others, Aqua Rose answered. After giving the matter some thought, she found Xiaofan's words reasonable. Since the information recorded on the stele was something left behind by an ancient god, it naturally wouldn't be something ordinary. She then turned to the rest of the team and said, "Everyone, please rest assured. Nothing has happened to the guild leader." The guild leader said that this mana fluctuation is merely a consequence of him unlocking the information recorded on the stele. He says that he is not in any danger and that we should continue clearing out the remaining trial monsters. He will rejoin us shortly. Aqua Rose's words kindled a sense of admiration toward Xiaofan in everyone in the team. They hadn't thought that Xiaofan would actually be able to obtain something from the stele. After a brief discussion, they promptly resumed clearing out the trial monsters in their path. In the meantime, Xiaofan was staring intently at the gradually forming crystal hovering before him. When extracting information from ancient legacy steles, once players successfully learned the magic arrays recorded on a stele and drew them, the drawn magic arrays would gather mana from the surroundings to create a memory crystal. This was one of the more common methods ancient gods used to pass down their legacies. After all, compared to books, memory crystals were much better at withstanding the ravages of time. So long as the memory crystal was intact, there wouldn't be any need to worry about parts of the information getting lost. 3 hours. 6 hours. 9 hours. After the magic arrays gathered mana for 15 consecutive hours, a memory crystal the size of 4 adult fists took shape before Xiaofan. This memory crystal was at least triple the size of ordinary memory crystals. Amazing! Just what is recorded in it? Xiaofan gazed at the memory crystal before him in astonishment. The memory crystals that Eliade had given him already contained a ton of information. If not for his brain capacity being sufficiently high, he would have lost consciousness when accepting all that information. The memory crystal before him, however, was 3 times larger than the ones the heavenly blue saint had given him. The amount of information contained within this unusually large memory crystal was definitely several dozen times more. Xiaofan could not even begin to imagine what kind of information awaited him. After observing the memory crystal for a brief moment, Xiaofan then tapped his finger on it to access its recorded information. He was really eager to find out what it contained. However, as soon as he did so, he was stunned. System: This memory crystal is extremely unstable and can remain in existence for only 2 natural days before disappearing. System, warning. You have discovered a large memory crystal. Because of insufficient concentration, you are unable to read the information completely. If you persist in reading the information, there is a very large chance you will enter a deep coma. Do you still wish to read the information? I can't read it even as a Tier 3 player. The system notifications took Xiaofan aback. Just what is recorded inside? This was definitely the first time he had come across such a situation. In fact, he had never heard of something like this happening before. It seems I toiled for nothing. Sure enough, the information recorded on an ancient legacy stele really isn't easy to obtain. Xiaofan smiled bitterly as he looked at the memory crystal in his hands. Having insufficient concentration wasn't a problem that could be solved quickly. Items capable of raising one's concentration were extremely rare in God's domain. The concentration he could receive from raising his levels and improving his equipment was also negligible at best. If he couldn't process the recorded information with the concentration of a Tier 3 player, then he would have to wait until he had completed his Tier 4 promotion. As for forcefully trying to read the recorded information, this was absolutely out of the question. Ostensibly, there was only a very large chance for him to enter a deep coma. In reality, if he did try to read the information, then he was guaranteed to fall into a coma. The time he would lose from being in a coma was one thing. What he truly feared was the irreparable brain damage. If that happened, he would have a much more difficult time with future tier promotions, something he definitely didn't want. Even if the information recorded in this memory crystal was incredibly valuable, he still wouldn't trade his future for it. After all, compared to the information left behind by an ancient god, reaching Tier 5 and Tier 6 was much more important. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Wait. There's another method I can use to read this memory crystal. Just as Xiaofan was about to store the memory crystal, he received a sudden inspiration. Divine Will. If I can polish myself using the Tier 4 Divine Will, I can push my concentration from the peak of Tier 3 to the Tier 4 standard. So long as my concentration reaches the Tier 4 standard, I shouldn't have any problems reading the information recorded in this. The more Xiaofan thought about it, the more he found his plan to be feasible. Anyone else would still have difficulties pushing their concentration to the Tier 4 standard within 2 short days, even if they could train themselves using the Tier 4 Divine Will. However, it was a different story for him. Thanks to his advanced bloodline, his concentration standard had long since reached the peak of Tier 3, just a step shy of the Tier 4 standard. Moreover, he was very familiar with training using the Divine Will. Given one day, he had an excellent chance of pushing his concentration to the Tier 4 standard. No sooner had Xiaofan stored the memory crystal than Aqua Rose called him and announced, "Guild leader, we discovered the trial boss." Chapter 2638, Ancient Lich, Black Dragon Soul. Aqua Rose and the others wore grim expressions on their faces as they looked at a towering, dilapidated altar some distance away in the middle of the tunnel. The reason for their reactions was that the altar's surroundings were filled with trial warriors and trial elites, these monsters numbering around 3,000, in addition to the trial boss. Moreover, the 4 corners of the altar each had a mana tower. Not only did the mana towers suppress all hostile forces within their range, but they also prevented players from using any skills and spells. This is just cheating. Not only are there so many monsters around the boss, but there are actually 4 mana towers as well. With this, let alone a 200-man team, even a 2,000-man team can't do anything. Floating Light cursed despite himself as he looked at the 4 mana towers. Mana towers were strategic-level defensive constructions and not just any ordinary constructions, but top-tier advanced constructions. They were also things that players on the Western continent were extremely familiar with. After all, every one of the Western continent's NPC cities possessed these defensive constructions. The Mana Tower was also a large part of the reason why the Western continent's NPC cities could develop steadily despite having to face the constant threat of the demonic creature armies. Originally, the trial boss and its underlings already had an absolute advantage. Now, these monsters even boasted the protection of 4 mana towers. How were players like themselves supposed to clear this trial? Sure enough, it is still too early for us to come here. Crimson Star could not help a bitter smile as she considered the resting Lich sitting atop the altar. Zorok, Ancient Lich, Superior Mythic, Level 122 HP 3, 700 000/3 700 000. While Zorok's HP of 3.7 billion wasn't particularly high for an Ancient Lich, this amount was more than enough to instill despair into players. Very few magically oriented monsters existed in God's domain. However, compared to physically oriented monsters of the same level and rank, magically oriented monsters were around 30% to 40% more difficult to handle. This was akin to the difference between physical class NPCs and magical class NPCs. Magical class NPCs were more adept at executing long-range, AoE attacks and could wreak much greater destruction than physical class NPCs could. Meanwhile, Ancient Liches were monsters that possessed magical talent surpassing even that of elves. In the hands of an Ancient Lich, spells were no different from toys, it could play around with magic however it wanted to. Previously, Violet Sword had come across a level 87, mythic-ranked Ancient Lich out in the fields. In order to defeat it, the guild had dispatched a 5,000-man legion filled with level 90+ experts, who had taken turns attacking the boss in teams of 1,000. In the end, they had slain the Ancient Lich, but at the cost of nearly 4,000 experts. Now, not only was the Ancient Lich before them level 122, but it was even a superior mythic-ranked monster. If they came across this Ancient Lich in the outside world, they would have most likely turned tail and fled already. To make matters worse, there were thousands of trial monsters and 4 mana towers supporting the Ancient Lich. With this, even a 10,000-man legion filled with expert players of the same level wouldn't be able to raid it. At this moment, let alone Violet Swords and Azure's members, even Aqua Rose and the other Zero Wing members frowned upon seeing Zorok. After all, the raid difficulty of this trial boss was simply stratospheric. In fact, in their opinion, Zorok was no longer a boss that players could challenge at Tier 3. Only a Tier 4 team would have any hope of raiding it. Guild leader Black Flame, the boss's raid difficulty is too high. Even if we throw all our lives away and use all our trump cards, I'm afraid we still won't be able to pose a threat to the boss. Do you still wish to continue fighting? Wildfighter asked as he turned to Xiaofan, who had just rejoined the team. At the same time, though, he could not help but sigh in disappointment. They had gone through great lengths to reach the trial boss. If there were a chance of success, he would want to try raiding the trial boss as well. However, no matter how he looked at the situation, he simply couldn't see any hope whatsoever. After all, if they wished to raid the Ancient Lich, they would need to destroy the 4 mana towers first. Otherwise, they would be no different from live targets for the Ancient Lich, unable to put up any resistance at all. However, destroying the 4 mana towers was easier said than done. After all, they would have to go up against the trial boss and several thousand trial monsters when attacking the mana towers. To make matters worse, the mana towers possessed incredibly strong defensive capabilities. Attacks below the Tier 4 standard wouldn't even scratch the towers. However, with the 4 mana towers suppressing all hostile forces within the vicinity, they wouldn't be able to use any skills or spells against the towers. In other words, they would have to use normal attacks against these mana towers while also having weakened basic attributes. In such a situation, how many players on the team could execute attacks reaching the Tier 4 standard? If they had to rely on only a handful of players to destroy the 4 mana towers, it was unlikely that they could destroy even 1 mana tower before they team-wiped. Not to mention, the mana towers would also periodically launch large-scale destruction spells. Just one of these spells would be more than enough to annihilate their team. Facing the simultaneous attacks of 4 mana towers was an absolute nightmare. Destroying one without using any skills or spells would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. How could they destroy all 4 of them within a short time? If you really have an even chance of success, then we can give your plan a try, Crimson Star said as she turned to study the distant altar. Wildfighter nodded in agreement. The most troublesome part about this entire raid was the 4 mana towers. If it was possible to destroy the 4 mana towers quickly, then an attempt was indeed justified. Since everyone agrees, that makes things simple, Xiaofan said, smiling when he saw that Crimson Star and Wildfighter were willing to try raiding the trial boss. Afterward, I'll personally destroy the 4 mana towers. During this period, I hope that you can keep the trial monsters busy. You'll destroy the 4 mana towers yourself? Crimson Star gaped at Xiaofan in disbelief. Although Xiaofang's attacks indeed carried power at the Tier 4 standard, the amount of time it would take him to destroy the mana towers on his own was no laughing matter. That's right. I'll destroy them, Xiaofan replied seriously while nodding. Alright, then. Since you wish to try, then let's try it, Guild Leader Black Flame. Crimson Star sighed helplessly when she saw that he was serious. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. At this point, she no longer held any hope of him succeeding. However, she didn't mind letting the Violet Sword members present die once to consolidate Violet Sword's partnership with Zero Wing. After all, aside from the long resurrection time, the death penalty players suffered in the ancient secret land was very low. Following which, everyone present readied themselves for battle and positioned themselves right outside the mana tower's suppression radius. Once they were given the command, they would immediately charge into the battlefield and attract the trial monster's attention. Guild Leader Black Flame, everything's ready. You may start any time. Crimson Star reported to Xiaofan after seeing that everyone was in position. Good. I'll start now. After saying so, Xiaofan unsheathed the abyssal blade and activated Black Dragon's soul. Chapter 2639, Black Dragon King's Might. When Xiaofan unsheathed the abyssal blade and activated Black Dragon's soul, the abyssal blade immediately transformed into a cloud of black mist, which then enveloped Xiaofan completely before expanding to cover a 60-yard radius around him. Before anyone could react to this strange development, a deafening dragon roar came from the cloud. In the next moment, a 30-meter-tall black dragon leaped out of the black mist, releasing a powerful aura that washed over the crowd. A dragon? Crimson Star and Wildfighter could not help doubting their eyes when they saw the incredibly realistic black dragon before them. The dragon race was one of the apex races in God's domain. Dragons were also a symbol of strength and destruction. Whenever one appeared on the continent of God's domain, turmoil would follow. Now, however, Xiaofan had actually transformed himself into a dragon. Moreover, in terms of appearance or life rating, he was exactly the same as a true dragon. The only unfortunate matter was that the dragon that Xiaofan had transformed into was only Tier 3. Even so, this was still an astounding ability. After all, a dragon's attributes were far superior to those of existences of the same tier. However, while the Violet Sword and Azure members were astonished by this matter, they were, after all, core experts of their respective guilds and quickly snapped out of their daze. Upon receiving Aqua Rose's command, they promptly charged toward the altar, together with Zero Wing's members. As soon as everyone entered the range of the mana towers, the altar's trial monsters detected them. Before they could even get within 300 yards of the altar, the trial monsters had already moved into position, with 500 trial monsters standing resolutely at the bottom of the altar's staircase. The remaining trial monsters positioned themselves on the various steps of the staircase and readied their bows. So long as the intruding players were within their attack range, they would immediately loose their arrows. The 4 mana towers surrounding the altar also started launching magic beams at the team. Boom! 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 Immediately, 4 light pillars emerged within the trial tunnel and vaporized everything within range. Fortunately, all the members on the team had spread out. In addition, the mana tower's cannons did not possess a very large AoE. As a result, aside from some unlucky players that had bad positioning, everyone else managed to slip out of the beam attack's AoE in time. Even so, the team had still lost over a dozen players just from that first round of attacks. Upon seeing this, the surviving members of the team gulped nervously, grim expressions settling on their faces. They hadn't even started fighting, yet they had already lost over a dozen members. At this rate, they would most likely get annihilated before they could even kill a trial monster. However, just as a heavy atmosphere descended on the team, a black figure suddenly flew overhead and arrived within 100 yards of a mana tower in the blink of an eye. Seeing this figure, everyone relaxed slightly and breathed out a sigh of relief. Only, when Xiaofan arrived within 100 yards of the first mana tower, the ancient Lich seated at the top of the altar suddenly opened its eyes, the blood-red glow in its hollow eye sockets locking onto him immediately. The Lich then extended its hand at the black dragon and started chanting an incantation. Less than a second later, a twofold magic array appeared beneath the Lich's feet. Speed casting? Crimson Star's complexion darkened when she saw Zorok's spell casting. Zorok originally already possessed incredibly high HP for an ancient Lich. Now, it was even capable of executing speed casting. Moreover, its speed casting was exceptionally fast, a tier 4 spell, which usually required 4 or 5 seconds to cast, got completed in less than a second. The Lich's casting speed was simply unbelievable. The instant the twofold magic array took shape, several hundred ice blades formed around Zorok. The ice blades then tore space as they shot straight at Xiaofan. Tier 4 spell, Frost Dance. Not only did every one of these ice blades carry power surpassing that of Tier 4 mythic monsters, but they also froze their surroundings completely. As the several hundred ice blades flew toward Xiaofan, they transformed their surroundings into a world of frost. Seeing this scene, everyone could not help but grow anxious. Dodging Zorok's attack was virtually impossible. If Xiaofan got stuck dealing with the ancient Lich's attacks, then he wouldn't even be able to close in on the mana towers. Just when the several hundred ice blades were about to devour Xiaofan, he suddenly extended a claw and swiped at the empty space before him. The phantom of a gigantic claw instantly appeared in midair. Holy Annihilation Mana Technique, Light Shadow. In the next moment, the gigantic claw tore through the frozen world and transformed the space before Xiaofan into a pitch-black void. The several hundred ice blades disappeared completely as if they had never appeared to begin with. He blocked it, so, this is Guild Leader Black Flame's true strength? Everyone present was stupefied when they saw the pitch-black void that had formed before the black dragon. Those were several hundred ice blades. Every one of those ice blades carried power surpassing that of ordinary mythic monsters. Going up against the ancient Lich's attack would be akin to going up against the simultaneous attacks of several hundred mythic monsters, yet Xiaofan had actually nullified all those ice blades with just a single blow. However, before everyone could snap out of their daze, Xiaofan flapped his wings and arrived before the nearest mana tower. He then sent a claw smashing into the 60-meter-tall tower. Boom! Along with a thundering explosion, the magic barrier protecting the mana tower shattered. The mana tower itself had also started trembling violently, its original durability of 5,000 instantly decreasing by over 200 points. Crimson Star and the others, who were still charging toward the altar, nearly had their eyes fall out of their sockets when they saw this. The mana tower's defensive capability was at the Tier 4 standard. In other words, non-Tier 4 attacks wouldn't harm the mana tower at all. Even if a Tier 3 attack managed to cause damage, it would, at most, reduce the tower's durability by the standard 20 points. Now, however, Xiaofan had reduced the mana tower's durability by over 200 points with just one attack. The power he demonstrated was simply astonishing. At this moment, let alone Crimson Star and the others, even Xiaofan himself was surprised by this situation. Transforming into a Black Dragon King actually elevated my strength to such an extent? When Xiaofan saw that the torn space before him was not showing any signs of recovery, he determined that the power of his attack had indeed reached the advanced tier 4 standard. Before he had transformed into a Black Dragon King, his basic attributes allowed him to exhibit power at only the basic tier 4 standard. However, in God's domain, further elevating one's power after reaching the tier 4 standard was incredibly difficult. Only by being capable of exhibiting power at the advanced tier 4 standard would one be able to just barely reach the standard of superior mythics. In other words, even without using any techniques, he could currently contend against the weakest of superior mythics. Despite this astonishing discovery, Xiaofan quickly recovered his senses and resumed attacking the mana tower before him. -224. -219. -222. As Xiaofang's claws landed on the mana tower one after another, the tower's durability rapidly decreased. In no time at all, the mana tower had already lost 1/5 of its total durability, the speed of its deterioration making Crimson Star and the others' blood boil. At this time, though, both the mana towers and the ancient Lich launched counterattacks at Xiaofan. Immediately, the 4 mana towers fired their magic cannons at Xiaofan, while the ancient Lich used its domain and over a dozen magic blades to restrict and attack him. Every one of the attacks sent at Xiaofan carried the power of a superior mythic. Not daring to be careless, Xiaofan continued using Light Shadow to defend himself before resuming his bombardment of the mana tower before him. However, Light Shadow placed an enormous burden on Xiaofang's concentration. Even after he transformed into a Black Dragon King and gained a much superior physique, the amount of concentration he consumed when executing Light Shadow hardly decreased. By the time Xiaofan had destroyed the second mana tower, he no longer dared to use Light Shadow to defend against the mana towers and ancient Lich's attacks, opting to use Sword's Orbit instead. However, the boost in power Sword's Orbit provided was inferior to that from Light Shadow. As a result, Xiaofan continuously lost HP as he defended himself. Approaching and attacking the mana towers also became much more difficult. By the time Xiaofan destroyed the third mana tower, his HP had already fallen to 64%. At this point, Zorok's attacks became even more frenzied. And when Xiaofan started attacking the fourth mana tower, the ancient Lich also started double speed casting and dishing out tier 4 spells like they were nothing. When Xiaofang's HP fell to 24%, the fourth and last mana tower's durability zeroed out. At the same time, the suppression on the space surrounding the altar disappeared, and everyone was free to use skills and spells again. Zorok grew thoroughly enraged upon seeing the fourth mana tower's destruction. Damnable dragon! Die! Zorok bellowed as it glared at Xiaofan. The world around Xiaofan immediately dimmed as a gigantic, threefold magic array appeared above his head. A tier 4 curse? Xiaofang's complexion darkened when he saw the threefold magic array. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. As he stared at it in shock, flames of annihilation suddenly descended from the threefold magic array, covering a 500-yard radius and enveloping the entire altar. Tier 4 curse, Annihilation Lotus. The faces of Crimson Star and the others sank at this sight. Shatter. Not daring to hold back, Xiaofan immediately widened his mouth and used his strongest move, Dragon Breath. Chapter 2640, Suppressing the Ancient Lich. Dragon Breath. The dragon race's trademark move allowed dragons to gather all their power into a single point and propel it. The resulting attack would carry power far beyond what dragons could normally exhibit. Dragon Breath was also one of the main reasons why dragons were labeled invincible among those of the same tier. A Tier 5 dragon breath could even destroy entire cities. The destructive power a dragon breath carried was even greater than a taboo skill or curse of the same tier. After Xiaofan executed dragon breath, a scorching white beam shot at the massive pillar of flames descending from the sky. Boom! 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 When the two attacks collided, space around the point of collision shattered and transformed into a pitch-black void. The powerful shockwaves from the impact were palpable even over 1,000 yards away. When the clash ended, everyone was stupefied by the outcome. What? He blocked it? That was a Tier 4 curse. Even a true Tier 3 dragon shouldn't be able to stop that. How did he do it? Crimson Star and the other magical class players on the team felt like they were dreaming when they saw the threefold magic array above them fading out of existence. The Tier 4 curse Zorak cast rivaled a Tier 5 spell. Meanwhile, a Tier 5 spell could break through even the defensive magic array of main cities, let alone annihilate a measly 200-man team of Tier 3 players. When they saw Zorak casting the Tier 4 curse, they had known that the battle was over and resigned themselves to death. None of them thought that Xiaofan would actually be able to stop this frightening attack and keep the whole team alive. His abilities were truly inhuman. Thank goodness I managed to block it. Otherwise, that really would have been a team wipe. Xiaofan breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw the descending pillar of flames dissipating. If not for him having further improved his understanding of the realms of truth and managing to integrate advanced combat techniques into his actions, he wouldn't have been able to elevate his dragon breath's destructive power. In that case, both he and everyone else below him would have been burnt to ashes. However, before Xiaofan and the others could catch their breath, Zorak started chanting once more and summoned another threefold magic array. How is this possible? This is a lie, right? How can it still use another Tier 4 curse? Everyone's complexion paled when they saw the ancient Lich using another Tier 4 curse. Most of the bosses in God's domain possessed only one team-wipe move. And even if a boss had multiple team-wipe moves, it wouldn't use them back-to-back. Now, however, Zorak was chanting another Tier 4 curse right after using one. The ancient Lich thoroughly shattered the conventions of God's domain. It's not even waiting for the ambient mana to recover. At this moment, let alone everyone else, even Xiaofan was surprised by this situation. He was not surprised that Zorak was using Tier 4 curses back-to-back. After all, the ancient Lich was a magically oriented boss. However, Zorak had just used a Tier 4 curse, so the mana around it was still extremely sparse. If the Lich used another Tier 4 curse now, the power of the curse would be significantly weaker. Zorak should have waited for the ambient mana to recover before using another killing move, yet the Lich did not do so. Even for Xiaofan, this was a fresh development. It's over. Its casting speed is too fast. We don't even have time to use Tier 3 curses to defend ourselves. Crimson Star despaired when she saw the fully formed, threefold magic array. She never thought that, after Xiaofan destroyed the 4 mana towers and blocked one of the ancient Lich's killing moves, things would turn out this way. With Dragon Breath on cooldown, it should not be possible for Xiaofan to use it again within a short time. In addition, he was simply too far away from Zorak. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't interrupt the ancient Lich's spellcasting. Meanwhile, the formation of a Tier 3 curse took at least 3 or 4 seconds. They simply didn't have enough time to defend against the ancient Lich's second attack. Just as Zorak was about to incant the final verse of its curse, however, a lithe figure suddenly appeared before it and slashed her greatsword down at the Lich. In the next moment, a flash dazzled everyone's eyes as the greatsword smashed into the ancient Lich's skull. Not only did the attack forcefully interrupt the ancient Lich's spellcasting, but it also made the Lich itself stumble 2 steps back, suffering over 4 million damage. Gentle Snow? Over 4 million damage? How high is her strength? Violet Swords and Azure's members were surprised when they discerned the identity of the ancient Lich's attacker. They never thought that Zero Wing actually had another expert capable of contending against the ancient Lich. While the ancient Lich was indeed a magically oriented boss, the basic attributes it possessed were still far superior to ordinary mythic monsters. Without strength surpassing that of ordinary mythic monsters, one wouldn't be able to budge the ancient Lich in the slightest. Meanwhile, after gentle snow interrupted Zorak, Xiaofan immediately flew forward to keep it busy. He gave the Lich no opportunities to cast any more Tier 4 curses. Good. A chance. Everyone, charge! Wildfighter yelled excitedly when he saw the ancient Lich occupied. Now that the mana towers were gone, so long as the ancient Lich was prevented from using any more Tier 4 curses and they could get within melee range of it, they would have an opportunity for victory. After all, what magically oriented bosses feared the most was melee combat. So long as they managed to pull Zorak into a melee, the boss's threat would be halved. Violet Swords and Azure's members charged at the trial monster's defensive line with renewed vigor. Taking the lead, Wildfighter, Crimson Star, Sinful Flame, Duan Hanshan, Solitary Frost, Yan Xiaoqian, and Floating Light were like the team's spearhead. They instantly broke a hole through the defensive line and allowed the team's other members to flood through it. However, the higher up the altar the team ascended, the more trial monsters they encountered. As a result, the team's advance gradually slowed. Damn it! There are too many trial elites. At this rate, we'll get killed before we can even close with the boss. Floating Light cursed as he fought 3 Grand Lord-ranked trial elites simultaneously. Previously, he still had the upper hand when he went up against 2 trial elites. However, as they ascended the altar, the number of trial elites they came across increased. Now, facing the simultaneous attacks of 3 trial elites, he didn't even have the opportunity to retaliate and could only passively defend himself. His HP also continuously decreased, and he needed the support of the healers in order to stay alive. At this moment, everyone was struggling in their fight against the trial monsters, their HPs continuously decreasing. Now, they were completely reliant on the team's healers to keep their HPs above a safe margin. We can't continue dragging the fight out like this. Violet and Wonder, you two open up a path. Everyone else, follow them. I'll hold the rear. Aqua Rose commanded when she saw that the team was already surrounded. Follow the 2 of them. The Violet Sword and Azure members present were confused by Aqua Rose's command. Yan Xiaoqian, in particular, found it unbelievable. Setting aside Violet Cloud, who held the upper hand even while going up against 3 trial elites simultaneously, Silent Wonder was just barely holding her ground against 3 trial elites. In fact, Yan Xiaoqian was faring even better than Silent Wonder right now, yet Aqua Rose wanted Silent Wonder to spearhead a breakthrough in the encirclement. However, before anyone could object to Aqua Rose's strange command, Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder both nodded and charged toward the thick of the monsters. What are they doing? They're already outside the range of the healers. Crimson Star suspected that Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder had gone crazy when she saw the 2 charging into the mob of trial monsters. Although Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder possessed relatively high combat standards and extraordinary combat power, they would still take significant damage if they went up against too many trial monsters at once. Without the support of healers, they wouldn't last very long. Even if Violet Cloud was a cleric herself, she currently had to focus on attacking and defending. She didn't have any time to spare casting healing spells. However, as soon as Crimson Star finished speaking, blades of mana started appearing around the 2 women. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Void Blade. Shadow Rage. The 2 of them combined had summoned over 300 magic blades. Moreover, every magic blade carried so much power that the space around them trembled. The power of these magic blades was definitely at the Tier 4 standard. Go! Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder let loose a low shout. The trial monsters surrounding them got blasted away one after another, and in no time at all, no monster remained within a 40-yard radius of the duo. Moreover, any monster that tried to approach them got repelled immediately. Chapter 2641, Zero Wings Combat Power. The sudden appearance of empty space on the altar's staircase instantly silenced Violet Sword's and Azure's members. They were holding back all this time? Yan Xiaoqian could not help doubting her eyes as she stared at Silent Wonder. After fully unlocking her own mana body as well, Yan Xiaoqian had thought that she had already caught up to and possibly even surpassed Silent Wonder. After all, in terms of combat standard, Silent Wonder had just recently entered the Void Realm, whereas she was only half a step away from the Domain Realm. Now, however, are all of Zero Wings' members monsters? Floating Light's eyes were wide with shock as he watched Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder carving a path up the staircase. He already had difficulties taking on 3 trial elites simultaneously, yet Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder currently held the upper hand despite going up against several hundred trial warriors and trial elites. None of the trial monsters could get within 30 yards of the duo. Their strength was simply unbelievable. Even Crimson Star and Wildfighter wouldn't be a match for Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder. Or to put it in another way, they were standing on completely different levels. Good. Everyone, enter the clearing they created. Aqua Rose immediately commanded, unfazed by the strength Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder were displaying. Upon hearing Aqua Rose's command, Violet Swords and Azure's members promptly snapped out of their daze and hurriedly followed Zero Wings members into the 30-yard safe zone the duo had created. For a time, the entire team steadily closed in on the ancient Lich while enveloped by Violet Cloud's and Silent Wonder's attacks, which formed a barrier that prevented the trial monsters from harming the team. Sure enough, the two of them have already achieved a considerably high standard in the spiritualization realm. Every one of their magic blades actually integrates a combat technique. It's as if they've assimilated basic combat techniques into their souls, Sinful Flame muttered as he marveled at the magic blades flying around the team. They've integrated basic combat techniques into every one of their magic blades? How is that possible? Yan Xiaoqian exclaimed when she overheard Sinful Flame's mutterings. Just executing a combat technique normally was plenty difficult. Executing combat techniques in quick succession was even more difficult. As for executing several hundred combat techniques simultaneously, that was simply inhuman. However, they have indeed succeeded in doing so. In fact, they're doing it as naturally as breathing, Sinful Flame said, a bitter smile forming on his face as he responded to Yan Xiaoqian's astonishment. Moreover, they aren't the only ones in Zero Wing capable of it. I really don't know how Black Flame managed to nurture so many monsters. As Sinful Flame and Yan Xiaoqian were conversing, the team arrived within 50 yards of the ancient Lich under Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder's aegis. However, as the team pressed closer to the ancient Lich, the magic blades Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder summoned grew increasingly translucent. It was obvious that their duration would end soon. Seeing this, everyone on the team inevitably grew nervous. While being closer to the trial boss was a good thing, the number of trial monsters around the boss greatly exceeded their expectations. If they lost the protection of these magic blades now, they definitely wouldn't be able to fend off the trial monsters. Everyone, gather around the boss and focus fire on it. Summer and I will hold the rear. Aqua Rose shouted through the team chat when she saw that the magic blades were about to vanish. She then rushed to the rear of the team. Everyone was stunned by Aqua Rose's words. Although the altar's staircase was only 60 yards wide, which a magical class player could easily cover so long as they stood in the middle, they would be up against several thousand trial monsters. Let alone 2 magical class players, even 100 magical class players couldn't stop the assault of so many monsters. Normally, the majority of the team would hold off the trial monsters while a small number of peak experts dealt with the boss. Now, however, Aqua Rose intended to stop these several thousand trial monsters with just 2 people. She was simply insane. However, before Crimson Star and Wildfighter could offer up their suggestion, Aqua Rose had already started incanting. A dark blue, 2-fold magic array, angled toward the staircase, immediately appeared above her. When she tapped the butt of her staff on the ground, a torrent of water gushed out of the magic array and down the altar's staircase. The frightening deluge flushed the trial monsters down the staircase. After the floodwaters swept away the trial monsters, Alluring Summer, who stood beside Aqua Rose, also completed her incantation. An electric barrier formed at the top of the staircase, preventing ingress. However, while the electric barrier stopped the trial monsters' advance, it did not block the trial monsters' attacks. For a time, every trial monster could be seen firing arrows at Aqua Rose and Alluring Summer. Everyone felt their scalp going numb when they saw the rain of several thousand arrows. However, as if they were graceful butterflies, Aqua Rose and Alluring Summer easily weaved their way around the arrows. In the end, not a single arrow managed to land on the 2 of them. Crap! What kind of guild is Zero Wing? Floating Light gaped in shock when he saw Aqua Rose and Alluring Summer stopping the advance of several thousand trial monsters all by themselves. At this moment, let alone Floating Light, even Solitary Frost and Yen Xiaoqian, who had lived together with Zero Wing's members for a while, were shocked by this scene. They felt as if this was their first time learning of the guild known as Zero Wing. Everyone, stop daydreaming. We need to help guild leader Black Flame deal with the boss quickly. Crimson Star ordered through the team chat after snapping out of her daze. Upon hearing Crimson Star's reminder, Violet Swords and Azure's members also promptly regained their composure. Indeed, now wasn't the time to watch Aqua Rose and Alluring Summer. Dealing with the ancient Lich took priority. Everyone else on the team then charged at the ancient Lich and started assisting Xiaofan and Gentle Snow in dealing with the trial boss. Although Zorak was incredibly powerful, it was, at the end of the day, still a magically oriented monster. After its opponents got within melee range of it, it would be fortunate if it could exhibit even half of its usual combat power. Moreover, with Xiaofan and Gentle Snow's constant harassment, Zorak couldn't even cast Tier 4 AoE spells, let alone Tier 4 curses. The ancient Lich's HP decreased rapidly. Even after Xiaofan reverted into a human, Zorak's HP still dwindled. After a little more than an hour had passed, the ancient Lich's HP had already fallen to 20%. Despicable humans. I will have all of you pay for daring to interrupt a sacrifice for the demon god. Zorak bellowed. A frightening burst of mana exploded forth from the ancient Lich's body, the shockwave so intense that everyone present got knocked back more than 30 yards. Not good. It's going to use the innate skill of Liches. Crimson Star turned solemn when she saw the ancient Lich going berserk. Everyone, distance yourself from the boss quickly. In God's domain, every powerful race had their own innate skills. An example would be the dragon race's Dragon Breath. Another would be Lich's Frozen World. Not only was this skill incredibly powerful, but it also could not be interrupted. So long as Frozen World was activated, anyone within range who did not have extremely high ice resistance would receive frost damage over time, as well as a movement speed debuff. Fortunately, Frozen World had a small AoE with a 40-yard radius. Ranged players could easily attack from outside the AoE. However, being able to use only ranged attacks against a magically oriented boss wasn't a good thing. Don't even think of getting off so easily. Xiaofan shouted as he activated the 7 Luminaries' Ring's Forbidden Domain. A layer of grey fog enveloped the entire altar, and the frightening mana surrounding Zorak scattered and disappeared. As a result, the ancient Lich failed to gather enough mana to activate Frozen World. In the end, Not only did Zorak not become more difficult to deal with, but it even became weaker instead. With the suppression of Forbidden Domain, the Ancient Lich could cast only Tier 3 spells. This reduced the raid difficulty significantly. 20%. 15%. 10%. However, as the battle progressed, Zorak also grew increasingly desperate. In exchange for reducing its own defense and HP, it started using Tier 4 spells in rapid succession, reaping the lives of the players before it. By the time the Ancient Lich's HP fell to 5%, less than 100 players remained alive. Fortunately, the damage everyone caused the Lich was also increasing. Moreover, the Lich kept burning its own HP to do battle. As a result, the Lich's HP still decreased at a rapid rate. Quick! Attack with everything you've got. The boss is almost down. Crimson Star shouted anxiously when she saw that the team was down to less than 70 players. At this moment, she could tell that the rate at which Zorak's HP decreased was slowing. Even though the Ancient Lich only had 3% of its HP left, that was still more than 100 million HP. To make matters worse, everyone's strongest skills and spells were on cooldown. They didn't have anything left to increase their DPS. 2%. 1%. When Zorak's HP fell below 1%, less than 20 players remained. At this point, aside from Kola, everyone else's HP was already at a critical level. Everyone was clearly at the end of their rope. Xiaofan decided to throw caution to the wind. He arrived beside the Ancient Lich and raised the abyssal blade high. Die. First sword, Light Shadow. 1 attack. 2 attacks. 3 attacks. Every attack inflicted over 3 million damage on the Ancient Lich. However, every execution of Light Shadow gave Xiaofan a massive headache. When he executed the mana technique for the 3rd time in a row, his complexion had already turned deathly pale. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Nevertheless, Xiaofan endured the pain and continued executing Light Shadow. 5 attacks. 6 attacks. 7 attacks. Finally, after Xiaofan executed his 8th consecutive Light Shadow, Zorak's HP zeroed out. The Ancient Lich then let loose an unresigned wail before collapsing to the ground. Chapter 2642, Ancient Lich's Loot. When the Ancient Lich collapsed to the ground, a purple glow enveloped the bodies of the surviving players. The EXP from the Ancient Lich was far more generous than what even ordinary superior mythics awarded, so much that Xiaofan jumped directly to level 120. As everyone's experience bar was rising rapidly, due to the Ancient Lich's death, the boundless mana that had gathered around the altar no longer had anyone binding it to the altar's vicinity. As a result, the mana started dispersing, and the trial monsters that were frenziedly attacking Aqua Rose and Alluring Summer suddenly collapsed to the ground, one after another, as if they had lost their souls. We won. An indescribable sense of joy and excitement welled up within Aqua Rose when she saw the collapsed trial monsters. At the same time, a sense of relief washed over her. Although both Alluring Summers and her HPs had barely decreased, their stamina and concentration were already at critical levels. Had the fight continued for another 2 or 3 minutes, they would definitely have collapsed from stamina and concentration exhaustion. Fortunately, the Ancient Lich had fallen before they did. In the meantime, although Xiaofan and the others felt joyful over defeating the Ancient Lich, they could not help falling on their backs in exhaustion, having almost depleted their stamina and concentration already. The hero trial. He actually did it. When Mythology's people find out about this, they will definitely go crazy. Crimson Star gazed at Xiaofan, who lay on the ground some distance away, with complicated emotions. Originally, Tori had only meant to use the hero trial as bait to buy time. No one from Violet Sword had expected Xiaofan and Zero Wing to succeed. After all, Mythology had partnered with multiple superpowers to form a 200-man team of peak and apex experts and still failed to conquer the ancient city's elite trial. While fighting the ancient Lich, Crimson Star had entertained the possibility of actually defeating the trial boss, but toward the end of the raid, she had concluded that victory was nothing but a fantasy. Near the end, Zorak had started killing multiple players with every move it used. The ancient Lich would wipe out the remnants of their team in 10 seconds. Meanwhile, trying to wreak over 40 million damage in just 10 seconds was simply impossible for a team of less than 20 surviving players. In the end, however, Xiaofan had surpassed everyone's expectations. At the final moment, he still managed to dish out such frightening DPS and reap the ancient Lich's remaining HP, creating a miracle. "Guild leader, are you alright?" Fire Dance asked worriedly as she arrived beside Xiaofan. At this moment, the life aura Xiaofan exuded was incredibly weak despite him still having quite a lot of HP. His complexion was also deathly pale. This clearly wasn't a result of just running out of stamina or concentration. "I'm fine. I just forcefully broke through the limits of my concentration, so I'll probably need to rest for quite some time to recover," Xiaofan replied, smiling. Because of his rapid-fire use of light shadow, he was mentally exhausted. In fact, he would most likely remain in this weakened mental state for quite some time. However, being able to break through the limits of his concentration was a fortuitous matter. After all, it would allow him to improve his brain capacity. Of course, in order to gain this improvement, he would need the corresponding support facilities and nutrient fluids. Otherwise, he would be courting brain damage. While Xiaofan and Fire Dance were conversing, the sound of a system notification entered everyone's ears. "System, congratulations. You have completed the hero trial. Trial completion rating, S rank. Rewarding 500 Lightforged city contribution points and permanent citizenship." The system notification repeated 3 times. While Zero Wings and Azure's members did not understand the importance of these rewards, Violet Sword's members revealed ecstatic expressions on their faces. What a bountiful reward. According to our investigations of Lightforged City, it'd take at least 7 or 8 quests just to get 100 contribution points. With 500 points, we can directly purchase 3 Tier 3 magic stones and attempt to boost the completion rate of our Tier 3 skills and spells past the 100% threshold. Floating Light exclaimed. As he read the contents of the system notification, he felt as if he was dreaming. Although neither Violet Sword or Mythology had entered the ancient secret land's Lightforged city before, their research into the city indicated that obtaining contribution points in the city was incredibly difficult. Normally, the only way was by doing quests. However, there was not only a restriction of accepting 1 quest at a time but also a limited number of quests available in the city every day. Meanwhile, Lightforged City's contribution points were the only currency recognized in the city. These points could be exchanged for various useful items. Among the items available for exchange in Lightforged City, the one that attracted the attention of Violet Sword and Mythology the most was the Magic Stone. The Magic Stone was an item that could provide players with guidance on breaking through the 100% limit of their skills and spells. A Tier 3 Magic Stone could provide guidance for Tier 3 skills and spells. It was undoubtedly a treasure that all expert players desired. After all, skills and spells followed players for the rest of their careers in God's domain. However, improving the completion rate of skills and spells, especially Tier 3 skills and spells, was not an easy task. Just being able to achieve a 90% completion rate was already an incredibly difficult feat to accomplish. Meanwhile, even reaching 100% completion rate with a Tier 3 skill or spell would provide a considerable boost to a player's combat power. If one could break through the 100% limit, the boost in combat power would be even greater. Now that the hero trial had awarded each player with 500 contribution points, this meant each of them could exchange for 3 Tier 3 magic stones. They were naturally excited by this outcome. At this moment, let alone Violet Sword's members, even Xiaofan was surprised by this reward. A 500-point reward for every player on the team? This trip really was worth it. Xiaofan similarly felt joyful when he saw the rewards the system granted. Others might not know what it meant to have 500 contribution points for an ancient city, but he did. In God's domain, a player who managed to rack up 500 contribution points in an ancient city could improve their combat power by a significant margin. Setting aside the commonly known magic stone, just the most basic enchanted potion could allow players to improve their strength rapidly. When consumed, the enchanted potion raised the ambient mana around players to a very high density for 6 hours. If players fought against powerful monsters or sparred against expert players during this period, they would gain significant improvements. In the past, because of the magic stone and enchanted potion, Violet Sword had been able to recruit and nurture plenty of expert players, which, in turn, raised the guild's strength even closer to that of the 5 great super guilds. As Xiaofan and the others were rejoicing over the trial rewards, the ancient Lich's corpse suddenly burst into countless particles of light. Immediately afterward, the particles of light coalesced into more than 100 light globes of varying sizes, every one of which radiated dense mana. So, this is the ancient Lich's loot? Everyone gaped in shock when they saw the items that appeared when the light globes faded. Although everyone had anticipated that the ancient Lich's loot would be extraordinary, they never thought it would be this abundant. Originally, they had only expected to obtain around 24 noble authority tokens. However, there were over 60 tokens, as well as over 20 inferior legendary materials and 6 legendary materials. Aside from the tokens and materials, the ancient Lich had also dropped a total of 14 pieces of dark gold equipment and 4 pieces of epic equipment. At this point in time, even the various superpowers barely had any level 100+ epic items. Now, however, the ancient Lich had dropped 4 level 100+ epic items, including an epic weapon. Azure's members could not help but drool over the ancient Lich's loot. The 4 epic items aside, just the legendary materials dropped were more than enough to make any superpower envious. After all, legendary materials could be used to produce custom-made epic weapons and equipment that had high compatibility with the players they were made for. Moreover, the production would also have a relatively high success rate. With the 6 legendary materials dropped, it was possible to create 6 custom-made epic weapons and equipment. Guild Leader Black Flame, according to our agreement, you have priority in choosing one item. Please take your pick, Crimson Star said to Xiaofan after recollecting herself. In that case, I'll choose that tattered scroll, Xiaofan said, pointing at a tattered scroll radiating mana so dense that it was second only to the mana from the epic weapon. Guild Leader Black Flame, are you sure? Crimson Star looked at Xiaofan in confusion when she saw the item he chose. In her opinion, the best item the ancient Lich dropped was the epic ranked axe. After all, the axe wasn't just any ordinary epic weapon but the replica of a legendary weapon, ranking at the top even among epic weapons. When equipped, it could raise the combat power of current peak experts by at least 30%. It should be of great help even to domain realm experts like herself. As for the tattered scroll Xiaofan chose, she had tried using an identification skill on it already. Although the scroll radiated powerful mana and looked very special, it was just a damaged epic scroll. The cost of repair alone would most likely be high. Not to mention, a scroll was also a consumable. How could it possibly compare to an epic weapon in terms of value? I'm choosing it, Xiaofan said as he nodded in affirmation. At this stage of the game, aside from himself, there was most likely nobody else in God's domain that would recognize this tattered scroll. This scroll was also the reason why he wanted priority pick over the trial boss's loot. This was because this scroll was something that could be obtained only from the first clear of Lightforged City's entrance trial. The Legacy Scroll. This magic scroll directly teleported players to the legacy land of their Tier 4 promotion quest, saving them plenty of time. In addition, it could be used to negate a failed attempt at challenging the Tier 4 promotion quest, allowing players to re-challenge their promotion quest right away in the same legacy land. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Tier 4 promotion quest was drastically different from past promotion quests. Every time players challenged their Tier 4 promotion quest, they would be sent to a different legacy land. Hence, players had no opportunity to learn from their failures and try again. However, if they could re-attempt a promotion quest in the same legacy land, their chances of success would increase drastically. Only, the legacy scroll the ancient Lich dropped was somewhat different from what Xiaofan had heard in his previous life. In the past, the legacy scroll obtained from Lightforged City's entrance trial was at the dark gold rank. On the other hand, the one the ancient Lich dropped was actually at the epic rank. However, Xiaofan did not dwell on the matter, quickly storing the legacy scroll. And after splitting the loot equally with Violet Sword, Xiaofan and the others promptly left the trial space. Once they exited the trial space, they entered Lightforged City under Crimson Star's lead, not bothering to wait at the trial entrance for the dead to get automatically resurrected. Chapter 2643, Astonishing Lightforged City Ancient Secret Land, Lightforged City. With a flash, Xiaofan and the other survivors of his team arrived in the middle of a plaza. The plaza was gigantic, easily able to house 4 sports stadiums. Erected in its center were more than 107-meter-tall statues. Every one of these statues had a different appearance. Some were armor-clad warriors, some, staff-wielding mages, and some, archers sporting bows. Despite their different appearances, these statues shared one similarity, a powerful aura. It felt as if these statues were alive. Upon seeing these statues, Xiaofan and the others were stunned. This ancient city is truly amazing. Just the statues in this teleportation plaza would most likely be enough to drive the experts in the outside world crazy, Xiaofan exclaimed as he studied the statues before him. The statues on the plaza might look ordinary, but in reality, they contained information on basic combat techniques catering to the class they represented. At this point in time, practically every player in God's domain already knew about the existence of combat techniques. However, the number of players that had the opportunity to learn a combat technique was still incredibly low. This was especially true for independent players. However, inside Lightforged City, information on basic combat techniques was on display as if it was worthless garbage. Players could freely learn the combat techniques displayed whenever they wanted and at no cost at all. Moreover, these combat techniques catered to specific classes. The wealth and generosity of Lightforged City were truly astonishing. At this stage of the game, even the members of the various major powers had to pay a certain price and make sufficient contributions in order to learn basic combat techniques, yet players could freely learn them in this plaza. Furthermore, the ambient mana inside Lightforged City was also incredibly dense. If players trained in Lightforged City's arenas, their improvement speed would definitely be several times higher than normal. The mana here is very special. If I can train here long-term, I might be able to further unlock my mana body, Violet Cloud said excitedly through the team chat. Indeed. Just standing here, I can already feel my control over mana strengthening. If I can take advantage of this experience, I might be able to further unlock my mana body as well, Aqua Rose said, nodding. Everyone else in the team had also noticed the special effects of Lightforged City's mana, their eyes glowing with excitement at this discovery. For Violet Sword's Crimson Star and Wild Fighter, nothing was more attractive than being able to fully unlock their mana bodies as soon as possible. Or to put it in another way, expediting the unlocking of the mana body was something the various superpowers were constantly seeking to accomplish. As for Zero Wings members in Azure's Sinful Flame, Solitary Frost, and Yen Xiaoqian, breaking through the mana body's 100% threshold was something they dreamed of achieving. After all, the difference between a mana body that had broken through the 100% threshold and a mana body that had yet to do so was massive, as Violet Cloud had proven. However, trying to break through the mana body's 100% threshold was incredibly difficult. In fact, they hardly had any leads on doing so. Now that the mana here was giving them some clues, they naturally grew excited. In this situation, though, Sinful Flame, Solitary Frost, and Yan Xiaoqian could not help envying Zero Wings and Violet Sword's members. After all, Zero Wings and Violet Sword's members could train in Lightforged City whenever they wanted. On the other hand, Azure's members had only 2 days, 1. Upon realizing this, Yan Xiaoqian and Solitary Frost took a seat and focused on the sensations they were currently experiencing. After all, it was unknown when they would get another opportunity to visit Lightforged City. There's still quite some time before the alchemy array disappears. Let's take a look at Lightforged City's City Lord's mansion first. It won't be too late to start training afterward, Xiaofan suggested, chuckling when he saw Yan Xiaoqian and the others sitting down to circulate their mana. I guess you're right, Yan Xiaoqian answered, nodding as she dismissed her thoughts of training immediately. Upon further consideration, she felt that what Xiaofan said was indeed correct. The special effects of the ancient city's mana could be said to be a bonus only. The true value of the city remained in its City Lord's mansion, where players could exchange for the various items available only in the ancient city, using the city's contribution points. Currently, every one of them had 500 contribution points. It would be a pity not to use them. Xiaofan and the others spent over 2 hours traveling down Lightforged City's main street before arriving in front of the 600-meter-tall City Lord's mansion. Currently, dozens of uniformed knights were standing guard before the entrance of the City Lord's mansion. Not only were these knights at level 180, tier 3, but they also possessed life ratings rivaling that of archaic species. The aura they radiated was comparable with that of mythic monsters of the same level. As for the knight captain leading these knights, he was a bona fide tier 4 NPC. His mere presence put intense pressure on Xiaofan. Meanwhile, when everyone entered the City Lord's mansion's first-floor exchange hall, they were stunned by the scene before them. Currently, all sorts of items were on display in the exchange hall. Among them were epic weapon and equipment designs, grandmaster potion recipes, rare skills and spells, bronze combat techniques, advanced construction designs, and designs for war weapons. Every one of these items was an unbelievable treasure that one could only come across by luck in the outside world. Now, however, a plethora of such treasures greeted their eyes. Of course, everyone could only afford to look at these items. After all, even the cheapest of these displayed treasures cost 4,000 contribution points, with the more expensive ones costing tens of thousands of points. With each of them having only 500 points, they shouldn't even think of purchasing any of these items. Fortunately, these valuable treasures weren't the only things available for exchange. There were still plenty of cheap and ordinary items within their means. An example of these items would be the magic stone and enchanted potion. Of those present, whether it was Violet Swords or Azure's members, they almost immediately chose to spend all of their contribution points on the tier 3 magic stones and enchanted potions. Guild Leader, the items available for exchange here have limited quantities. Let's quickly exchange for some tier 3 magic stones and enchanted potions as well. If we wait until the others get resurrected, there won't be anything left for us, Aqua Rose urged hurriedly as she looked at Xiaofan, who showed no interest in the magic stones and enchanted potions at all. All items in the exchange hall had an exchange limit. While some would be restocked over time, the more valuable treasures were unique items, no longer available once exchanged. As for the tier 3 magic stones and enchanted potions, while they weren't unique items, if everyone were to spend all 500 of their contribution points on these 2 items, there would only be enough to supply 50 people. Once these items sold out, those who wanted them would have to wait until they got restocked to exchange for these items. However, who knew when these items would get restocked? No need to rush this, Xiaofan said, shaking his head. He then shifted his gaze to a shelf carrying bottles of icy blue liquid, saying, "Have everyone exchange for 10 master concentration recovery potions first." Guild leader, that concentration recovery potion is too expensive at 50 points per bottle. Do we really need to buy it? Aqua Rose could not help her exasperation when she saw the price of the master concentration recovery potion. That item only aids players in recovering concentration. Moreover, each potion lasts only 2 hours. Although it is a rare potion in the outside world, spending our precious points on it is a little. Concentration recovery potions were indeed incredibly rare but not particularly useful since players naturally recovered their concentration over time. If players rested inside a city, their recovery rate would be even quicker. Hence, items that helped in the recovery of concentration were not that expensive on the market. Spending 50 contribution points to exchange for just one master concentration recovery potion now was simply an extravagance. After all, the master enchanted potion cost only 10 contribution points, yet it lasted 6 hours. Relax. Just exchange all your points for the potion. I guarantee that the value you can get from these potions will greatly surpass your expectations. They're even more valuable than those tier 3 magic stones, Xiaofan said, chuckling when he saw the anxious look on Aqua Rose's face. In his opinion, the master concentration recovery potion was very cheap. Moreover, they were allowed to purchase the potion only because they had the noble authority token. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the qualifications to do so. If these master concentration recovery potions were put up for sale during his previous life, just one potion would have sold for the price of one epic material. Even at such a price, rarely anybody would be willing to sell their potions. After saying so, Xiaofan spent all his points on master concentration recovery potions without hesitation. Aqua Rose no longer tried to dissuade Xiaofan. After all, he definitely had his reasons for such a decision. Following which, she and the others exchanged all their points for master concentration recovery potions as well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Violet Swords and Azure's members were confused upon seeing this scene. They could not understand why Zero Wings members would exchange for potions that did not provide the slightest bit of help in training. However, they did not pay too much attention to this matter. After all, their alchemy array's duration was running down. Now that they had obtained the magic stones and enchanted potions, they had to devote their efforts to training. As for what Zero Wings members intended to do, that was none of their business. Violet Swords and Azure's members promptly ran to Lightforged City's arenas to train. As for Zero Wings members, they made their way to the city wall under Xiaofang's lead. Let's hope these potions will be enough for me to break through to the tier 4 standard. As Xiaofan gazed at the gigantic statues atop the distant wall, his footsteps sped up automatically. Chapter 2644, Absorbing Divine Will. The gigantic statues erected atop Lightforged City's tall walls gave off an indescribable sense of majesty and oppression. When Xiaofan and the other Zero Wing members got within 100 yards of these statues, they immediately sensed a powerful pressure weighing down on their minds. For a moment, they felt as if their bodies no longer belonged to themselves as their consciousness started to waver. They were like a small boat sailing across a stormy ocean. Even the slightest mistake could result in their demise. What a powerful mental assault. Just this one strike already makes me feel as if I just executed an advanced combat technique. If this continues, I'll probably exhaust my concentration in no time at all, Gentle Snow commented, frowning as she sensed the mental pressure from the statues. She had realized that these statues were extraordinary when she saw them from outside the city. After all, just looking at these statues from a great distance had already taken a toll on her concentration. Now that she stood so close to these statues, she realized that they were even more frightening than she initially thought. Even without looking at these statues, her mind was subject to a mental suppression that depleted her concentration. Guild leader, don't tell me the training you mentioned will take place here? Aqua Rose objected as she turned to Xiaofan. That's right. We'll be training here, Xiaofan said as he smiled and nodded. Guild leader, the mental assault of these statues is too powerful. Let alone using skills and spells, even executing basic mana control is a problem. It is impossible for us to conduct any training here, Aqua Rose argued. When she tried manipulating and gathering her mana earlier, the statue's mental assault had interrupted her. The incessant mental assault would make using any skills or spells here impossible. Everyone else nodded in agreement with Aqua Rose's words. It might be fine if the mental assault was something ordinary, but the statue's mental assault threatened to knock them unconscious. Against such a powerful and persistent mental assault, even controlling their physical bodies would be a problem. Rather than waste time here, it would be much better if they went to one of the hotels in the city to practice their mana control. The training efficiency there would be several hundred times better than here. It is indeed difficult to train mana control here, but I didn't bring you all here for that. Instead, we're here to train our concentration, Xiaofan explained. Concentration training. How is that possible? Stunned by Xiaofan's words, Aqua Rose could not help eyeing him skeptically. At this moment, let alone Aqua Rose, Gentle Snow and the others were likewise dubious, suspecting that Xiaofan was joking with them. In God's domain, it was common knowledge that raising the concentration attribute was much more difficult than raising the stamina attribute. Of course, while the difficulty of increasing one's concentration was high, the returns one could gain from improved concentration were also immense, far outstripping those from improved stamina. This was especially true for magical class players and expert players. The help they could gain from the concentration attribute was dozens of times greater than what they could gain from any other basic or hidden attribute. This was because concentration affected players' control over their physical bodies and mana, aside from being the resource necessary to execute combat techniques. However, even now, there were only two known methods to permanently improve one's concentration. The first was to raise one's tier, while the other was to raise one's life rating. Hence, any item that could provide a temporary boost to a player's concentration was incredibly valuable and sold for at least 10 times the price of similarly ranked items. The most inferior item that provided concentration would be at the dark gold rank. However, even at such a price, the various major powers would frantically contest for any of such items that appeared on the market. Now, however, Xiaofan was telling them that it was possible to directly improve their concentration attribute. Their skepticism was only natural. Normally, raising the concentration attribute is indeed an incredibly difficult task. However, the statues here are extraordinary. The mental assault you're sensing is actually divine will. So long as you clash directly with this divine will, you'll be able to absorb a subtle amount of it, which, in turn, will improve your concentration slightly, Xiaofan explained, chuckling. If I have to point out the most valuable features inside Lightforged City, then these statues will have to be one of them. However, the divine will of these statues can be considered a consumable. As players absorb it, the available volume will decrease. While these statues will recover their divine will over time, who knows how long it will take for them to recover. If we miss out on this opportunity, it's unlikely we'll come across another one like this in the future. So, that's why you had us spend all our contribution points on concentration recovery potions, Aqua Rose exclaimed in realization. If Violet Sword's people find out about this, they'll most likely send all their peak experts to train here, regardless of the cost. After all was said and done, although Zero Wing had signed a partnership contract with Violet Sword and now possessed 100 entry slots to the ancient secret land, Zero Wing did not have a base of operations inside Violet Light City. The resources Zero Wing could obtain from the ancient secret land definitely couldn't compare to what Violet Sword could get. Violet Sword would definitely be able to secure more contribution points in Lightforged City than Zero Wing could. If Violet Sword found out about the statue's secret, it would definitely send a large number of experts to absorb the divine will here, rapidly depleting it and leaving only scraps for Zero Wings members. Alright, everyone, start focusing your mind to resist the mental assault. The closer you approach these statues, the stronger the mental assault becomes. Meanwhile, the stronger the mental assault you resist, the greater the improvements you will gain. However, make sure not to be too greedy. If your consciousness leaves your body too many times, it will end up weakening the absorption rate, you might even fail to absorb any divine will. So, make sure to train at an appropriate distance, Xiaofan said as he looked at the others. Upon hearing Xiaofang's instructions, Aqua Rose and the others sat down excitedly and started resisting the mental assault of the statue before them. Ordinary experts treated concentration as an attribute that determined the number of times they could use combat techniques. However, for players like themselves who had fully unlocked their mana bodies, the concentration attribute held an entirely different meaning. By improving their concentration, they could improve their mana control, which would, in turn, allow them to execute more complex actions using mana. With this, they could accomplish things that they previously couldn't. One of the simplest examples would be breaking through the mana body's 100% threshold. With their present concentration, their mana control was at their limit. However, if they wished to break through the 100% threshold, they needed to be capable of controlling even more mana. Now that an opportunity to break through the mana body's 100% threshold was right before them, they did not wish to waste even a second. However, after everyone attempted to resist the statue's mental assault, their original excited expressions disappeared, replaced by solemnity. Their complexions had similarly turned pale. The difference between enduring and resisting the mental assault is actually this large? Aqua Rose nearly collapsed on her back after her first attempt. She had expended roughly 5% of her concentration after resisting just one mental assault. Her consciousness had even momentarily left her body, making her lose all control over herself. The experience was extremely uncomfortable and completely different from when she was just passively enduring the mental assaults. At this moment, everyone, aside from Xiaofan, promptly retreated from their original positions, not daring to continue resisting the mental assault at the 90-yard mark. However, even Xiaofan did not fare much better than everyone else. Although he had managed to resist the mental assault, the amount of divine will he absorbed was far from ideal. Moreover, just a single attempt had cost him 1/40th of his concentration. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After resisting the mental assaults for another 2 minutes, Xiaofan scarcely had any concentration remaining and had no choice but to consume a concentration recovery potion. With the boost provided by the potion, his concentration recovery rate just barely surpassed his consumption rate. After training like this for around an hour, Xiaofan opened his eyes and looked at the nearest statue, with a depressed expression. During this past hour or so, his concentration had indeed improved, however, the improvement was basically negligible. In fact, if not for him being at the domain realm and having an accurate grasp over his own body and mental state, he wouldn't have noticed this improvement at all. If he continued at this rate, his concentration would be nowhere near the Tier 4 standard even after using all his master concentration recovery potions and training for 20 hours here. At this rate, my concentration won't reach the Tier 4 standard even after the various superpowers peak experts have already started challenging their Tier 4 promotion quest. Xiaofan could not help a bitter smile at this situation. It's no wonder hardly any expert players would rely on divine will to improve their concentration standard. However, just as Xiaofan was about to focus his mind to resist the next mental assault, Violet Cloud, who sat behind him, suddenly stood up and walked up to the 80-yard mark, then took a seat there. Chapter 2645, Advanced Bronze Combat Technique. Upon seeing Violet Cloud resisting a mental assault at the 80-yard mark, Aqua Rose and the others goggled in shock. After all, there were no changes to Violet Cloud's expression. It was obvious that the 80-yard mental assault posed no problem for her. In fact, she could probably move even closer to the statue. She actually managed to improve her mental condensation by so much already? At this moment, even Xiaofan was astonished when he looked at Violet Cloud. If players wished to absorb divine will quickly, they could rely on mental condensation, aside from items that aided in concentration recovery. The more condensed one's mental state was when clashing with the mental assault of a divine will, the greater one's absorption rate of divine will would become. Only, there was no concrete technique to allow players to condense their mental state because a person's mental state was insubstantial. Players could only sense it and not touch it directly. The only thing players could do was focus their attention and resist distractions. At this moment it was obvious that Violet Cloud had gained improvements in mental condensation, which strengthened her mental state significantly. As a result, she could resist a stronger mental assault. Otherwise, there was no way she could withstand the 80-yard mental assault so easily. Xiaofan had long known that Violet Cloud was very talented. After all, in the past, she had relied on her own strength to reach Tier 6, when over 90% of the geniuses supported by the various superpowers had ended up getting stuck at Tier 5, never to cross the final threshold. One could easily imagine how frightening Violet Cloud's talent was for her to accomplish this impossible feat without any support. However, Violet Cloud's talents had still surpassed Xiaofang's expectations, despite him knowing the girl's past. This was clearly everyone's first time executing mental condensation. Not even Xiaofan had learned any techniques or methods to better execute mental condensation. However, after training for just a little over an hour, Violet Cloud had actually achieved a breakthrough already. Her talent was truly terrifying. Meanwhile, Violet Cloud's sudden breakthrough spurred everyone's fighting spirit. They immediately took a few steps forward in order to test whether they could resist a stronger mental assault or not. In this situation, even Xiaofan himself could not help advancing an additional 5 yards, seating himself 85 yards away from the statue before him. However, Xiaofan instantly paled after resisting a mental assault at the 85-yard mark. His consciousness also turned blurry for quite some time. I advanced by just an additional 5 yards, yet I'm actually losing nearly 10% of my concentration per hit. I also barely absorbed any divine will. Sure enough, mental condensation isn't something that can be improved on so easily. Xiaofan smiled bitterly as he looked at Violet Cloud resisting the 80-yard mental assaults with ease. He had expected his mental state to have improved by quite a bit after experiencing so many mental assaults at the 90-yard mark. However, it seemed that it was merely wishful thinking. It seems I can only return and slowly accumulate concentration, Xiaofan thought, shaking his head, and stood up to return to his original location. As he got to his feet, the statue before him released another wave of mental pressure. This time, though, he did not try to resist it, just passively endured it. After enduring this mental assault, Xiaofan immediately felt his consciousness blur slightly. His control over his body also became slightly sluggish. Overall, though, he fared a lot better than with active resistance. Despite facing the same mental assault, there's such a huge difference between passively enduring and actively resisting. If the effects of actively resisting the mental assault were the same as the result I just experienced, I would most likely be able to move within 30 yards of the statue. Xiaofan could not help but sigh ruefully when he sensed the effects of passive endurance. When he reached his original position, another mental assault washed over him, nearly making him lose his footing. After experiencing this mental assault, though, he paused as a spark of inspiration flashed across his eyes. So, that's the case. Why didn't I think of this before? Xiaofan clenched his fists as realization dawned upon him. He then turned to the nearby statue and thought, the reason why the effects of passively enduring the mental assaults are so subdued is simply that I gave up control over my body and allowed my mental state to go along with the divine will during the brief instant of collision. However, when I actively resist the mental assault, I'm struggling against the divine will to retain control over my body. The concentration consumed in doing so is naturally much greater. With sufficiently high control over my own body, I should have a much easier time resisting the divine will. After thinking up to this point, Xiaofan immediately sat down and started testing his theory. Previously, he had been fully focused on using his mental state to resist the divine will's influence. Now, he chose to spread his focus across his entire body instead, to prevent anything from influencing his control over it. In the next moment, another mental assault arrived. Although Xiaofang's complexion paled slightly, a smile formed on his face. Sure enough. Xiaofan grew excited when he sensed the amount of concentration he had just lost. Originally, he would lose around 1/40th of his maximum concentration when resisting a 90-yard mental assault. Now, however, he had lost only 1/50th of his concentration. Although the improvement was minor, he had, at the very least, taken the first step in the correct path of resisting the mental assaults. Following which, Xiaofan retreated further back and sat down just outside of the range of the statue's mental assaults. He then considered ways to further strengthen the control he had over his body, to spread his focus across his entire body as much as possible. Or to put it in another way, he tried to exert all his muscles in one direction. That way, he could achieve maximum control over his body. However, this was Xiaofang's first time doing such a thing. Even though he had already reached the domain realm and achieved precision control over his 5 senses and physical body, he had never tried exerting every muscle in his body in a single direction. When he actually tried doing so, he discovered what a challenge he had set up for himself. No matter how hard he tried, he succeeded with less than 10% of his muscles. Sure enough, it really is difficult. It would be great if I had a combat technique that could help adjust my muscles' direction of exertion. As Xiaofan tried exerting every one of his muscles in the same direction, he felt that this feat was even more difficult than executing a bronze combat technique. After all, a bronze combat technique utilized only a portion of his muscles. Moreover, the utilized muscles wouldn't move in the same direction either. That's it. Inspiration dawned upon him as his thoughts wandered in the direction of combat techniques. Since there's no such combat technique in existence, I can just create one. Even if I can't utilize every muscle in my body, it will still be good enough if I can utilize a greater portion. After thinking so, he started creating such a combat technique. Compared to advanced combat techniques, the combat technique Xiaofan was conceptualizing was much more difficult. However, with his extensive combat experience and ability to integrate advanced combat techniques into his every action, albeit just barely, creating such a combat technique wasn't an impossible task. This was just like manipulating the mana inside a magic array. The proper manipulation of the mana of a magic array could boost the magic array's power beyond what it could normally display. Meanwhile, what he needed to do now was to treat a portion of his body as a magic array and his muscles as the mana flowing through this magic array. 1 hour. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU 3 hours. 9 hours. After 10 hours of trial and error, Lightforged City's stable space rippled. At the same time, the sound of a system notification entered Xiaofang's ears, its contents echoing in his mind. System, congratulations. You have created an advanced bronze combat technique. Please name your combat technique. Chapter 2646, Divine Change. What? An advanced bronze combat technique? Xiaofan was stunned when he saw the system notification. The combat technique he had aimed to create this time was only meant to give him better control over his body so that he could resist stronger mental assaults. In his opinion, it would be fortunate if such a combat technique could be deemed an advanced combat technique. However, it turned out he had miraculously created an advanced bronze combat technique. Moreover, he had never even heard of advanced bronze combat techniques. As far as he knew, for combat techniques, what came after the bronze rank was the silver rank, with nothing in between. Hence, he truly could not help his astonishment. Most importantly, this combat technique he had just created couldn't even be considered a complete product. After all, in its current state, this new combat technique merely allowed him to exert a portion of his muscles, nothing more. There were no follow-up moves to convert it into an offensive or defensive technique. At best, it was a semi-finished product. Is it because it is an unfinished technique that the system is unable to give an accurate evaluation, hence, it is labeled an advanced bronze combat technique? While entertaining such thoughts, Xiaofan executed his newly created combat technique and punched at the empty air in front. And indeed, his new combat technique was truly frightening. Thanks to this new technique, just his punch alone destabilized the space before him. This result was notable since he was currently standing inside Lightforged city, a city that had been strengthened by ancient gods. The space within the city should be extremely stable. Power that could originally destabilize space in the outside world wouldn't necessarily be capable of doing so inside Lightforged city. In fact, even Tier 5 powerhouses shouldn't think of destabilizing the space here. Nevertheless, the punch he just executed had made the space before him ripple slightly. As a Tier 3 player, he definitely shouldn't be capable of exhibiting such power even with a bronze combat technique. At the very least, the bronze combat technique Lightning Flash he had learned couldn't do so. It seems this combat technique that exerts my muscles in a single direction has considerable potential. It is clearly only a semi-finished product, and I can exert only 15% of my entire body's muscles, at most, yet I can already exhibit such power. If I can complete this technique and use it to exert all my muscles, its power would most likely rival gold combat techniques. When Xiaofan saw the system's evaluation, he immediately realized the possibility of creating a powerful combat technique. Currently, plenty of combat techniques have been found in God's domain already. However, combat techniques at the bronze rank and above were still incredibly rare. Learning these combat techniques was also incredibly difficult, even if players had a legacy tablet. If he could create a silver or gold combat technique and freely distribute it to the guild's core members to learn, then the standard of Zero Wing's experts would rise to a whole new level. As Xiaofan was lost in his thoughts, the system sent him another notification. System, please name your combat technique. If you do not name it, the system will automatically generate a name for it after 10 minutes. A name? After giving the matter some thought, Xiaofan said, since I created this combat technique for the purpose of training using Divine Will, let's call it Divine Change. After he named his new technique, he shifted his gaze toward the nearby statue. Currently, Violet Cloud had already advanced to the 60-yard mark. The others had similarly made significant improvements. For example, Aqua Rose, Alluring Summer, and Luofe were now at the 75-yard mark. As for melee players like Fire Dance, Gentle Snow, and Yen Tianqing, although they fared slightly worse, they had reached the 80-yard mark. Their performance was much better than Xiaofan's. Meanwhile, after Xiaofan observed everyone for a while, Violet Cloud actually stood up from her spot and moved to the 50-yard mark. Her mental condensation's improvement speed was simply inhuman. It seems I have to give my new technique a try. Although it is only a semi-finished product, it should still improve my results by a large margin. Xiaofan could not help a bitter smile when he saw Violet Cloud sit by the 50-yard mark. As the guild leader of Zero Wing, he didn't need to be the best at everything, but he definitely couldn't be the worst. Otherwise, it would simply be humiliating. Following which, Xiaofan moved past the 100-yard mark and slowly walked toward the statue. Meanwhile, the Zero Wing members seated before the statue noticed his arrival and could not help shifting their attention to him. The guild leader is finally prepared to raise his concentration. The sight of Xiaofan entering the range of the Divine Will's mental assaults piqued Aqua Rose's curiosity. Previously, Xiaofan had moved beyond the 100-yard mark and sat quietly in a corner. This situation had confused her and everyone else. They simply could not understand what he was doing. Although they had obtained citizenship in Lightforged City and gained the qualifications to stay for however long they wanted in the city, the duration of the alchemy array they had to use prevented them from staying inside the ancient secret land for long periods. Hence, every second and minute spent inside Lightforged City was incredibly precious. However, Xiaofan had actually wasted 10 whole hours doing nothing. I really can't figure out why the guild leader sat there for so long. He even wasted nearly an hour of the precious concentration recovery potion, Kola muttered as he gazed at Xiaofan in confusion. Originally, their time in Lightforged City was already limited. Now that 10 hours had gone by, they had less than 2 days left. In addition, they had to take a small break once every 2 hours to relax their tense minds. To put it simply, they were pressed for time. Had Xiaofan spent the past 10 hours improving his concentration standard with them, he would have most likely reached the 70 or 80-yard mark already. With the improvement speed at these locations several times better than that at the 90-yard mark, his concentration might even get upgraded to the Tier 4 standard by the time he ran out of Master Concentration Recovery Potions. While everyone was mulling over Xiaofan's actions, Xiaofan arrived at the 85-yard mark. However, he showed no intention of sitting down to train. Instead, he simply stood there quietly as he actively resisted the approaching mental assault. Pang! Upon coming into contact with Xiaofan, the mental assault actually shattered. It shattered? How is this possible? Aqua Rose was stunned when she sensed the mental assault approaching Xiaofan shatter. She turned to stare at Xiaofan. Although they had their eyes shut previously in order to focus their minds while training, they could still clearly sense the mental assault with their minds. When the mental assault came into contact with Xiaofan, it seemed to crash into an immovable wall and shatter. The ensuing ripple from the mental assault shattering was like a flame in darkness. It was difficult not to notice it. Guild leader, what did you do? You can actually shatter that mental assault? Kola asked, unable to suppress his curiosity. The mental assault was intangible. Just trying to actively resist it was already a difficult task. As for shattering the mental assault, that was something none of them had ever considered doing. At this moment, everyone was staring at Xiaofan in confusion. I didn't do anything special. I just tried retaliating against the mental assault. I never thought that it would shatter, Xiaofan said, similarly puzzled by this situation. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He had merely tried using divine change against the mental assault to test the technique's effects. He never imagined such a result. In the end, the mental assault did not affect him adversely in any way and simply disappeared like a passing breeze. Xiaofang's answer and the calm look on his face rendered Aqua Rose speechless. This explanation was simply too abbreviated. What did he mean by, just retaliating? Meanwhile, after Xiaofan gave his explanation, he promptly stepped closer to the statue, his heart brimming with curiosity about how much progress he could make using divine change. Chapter 2647, Statue's Forbidden Zone. With each step Xiaofan took toward the majestic statue before him, the mental assault coming from it intensified. However, he kept advancing without being affected in the slightest, as if the mental assault was non-existent. 80 yards. 70 yards. 60 yards. After just a short moment, Xiaofan arrived at the 50-yard mark and stood beside Violet Cloud. At this moment, though, his expression turned slightly serious. It was obvious that the statue's mental assaults were starting to affect him. However, everyone also understood that this was not his limit. Is he a monster? He actually caught up to Violet so quickly. Moreover, he's not even at his limit yet. Luofei, who was seated nearby, stared at Xiaofan in shock. Just what did he do during this period to improve so much? Players that had never attempted mental condensation before might not know how much improvement Xiaofan just displayed. However, everyone present, who had been continuously honing their mental condensation and resisting the statue's mental assaults for more than 10 hours now, knew exactly how much Xiaofan had improved. While Xiaofang's shattering the mental assault at the 85-yard mark might seem very amazing, the mental assault weakened with distance. The 85-yard mental assault was incomparable to the 50-yard mental assault. In fact, Luofei had doubted that Xiaofan could even resist the 50-yard mental assault. As for Violet Cloud, her talent was clear for all to see. Violet Cloud's talent was so great that Luofei found it to be mind-boggling. Hence, when she saw Xiaofang's mental condensation standard and improvement speed losing out to Violet Cloud's, she did not find it surprising at all. Moreover, Violet Cloud was a magical class player, which gave her an advantage over melee players when it came to mental condensation. This point was clear from everyone's training results during this period. Therefore, it was very normal for Xiaofan to be inferior to Violet Cloud. Now, however, Xiaofan had actually surpassed Violet Cloud, shattering even the 50-yard mental assault. This situation was truly surprising. After all, Xiaofan had been training his mental condensation outside the 100-yard mark. Trying to improve one's mental condensation at that distance was much more difficult. This was something they had tested for themselves during their break periods. However, even under such a situation, Xiaofan had still managed to surpass Violet Cloud. The amount of talent he possessed was simply ludicrous. While Luofei was in a daze, Xiaofan had arrived at the 30-yard mark. And upon retaliating against the mental assault here, he stumbled back one step, his complexion immediately turning pale. It seems it's going to be difficult to get any closer than this. The power of the mental assault here is already several times that of the 50-yard mental assault. It's no wonder so many people couldn't reach and cross the 30-yard mark in the past. When Xiaofan tried retaliating against the 30-yard mental assault, he had instantly lost 1/15 of his maximum concentration. This was no longer a loss he could afford. In the past, the area within 30 yards of Divine Will statues had been considered a forbidden zone. According to rumors, anyone that managed to train within this zone would see a qualitative leap in their mental condensation standard. Although this improvement would not provide players with a substantial boost in combat power, it would hone their perception of mana to inhuman levels, as well as facilitate the formation of their magic domain when they reached Tier 4. It was even rumored that the improvement one received from training within the Forbidden Zone could provide significant help when challenging the Tier 5 promotion quest. Meanwhile, upon seeing Xiaofan finally fail, Aqua Rose and the others could not help a sigh of relief. After all, if Xiaofan were to get any closer to the statue, they would really start suspecting that they were severely lacking in talent. Although I can't train efficiently at the 30-yard mark, training at the 35-yard mark isn't a bad option either. With this, I shouldn't need more than 2 days to raise my concentration to the Tier 4 standard. Xiaofan could not help but sigh when he looked at the Forbidden Zone before him. However, he wasn't too disappointed. In its current state, Divine Change was still incomplete. Originally, he thought that he would be fortunate if he could train at the 50-yard mark with the help of the combat technique. After all, he could exert only 15% of his body's muscles in the same direction. He still couldn't unify the strength of the remainder of his body. Hence, he was already quite satisfied with his current results. As for entering the Divine Will's Forbidden Zone, so long as he could perfect Divine Change, it should not be a problem at all. Following which, Xiaofan returned to the 35-yard mark and started absorbing the Divine Will there, improving his concentration. As he continuously absorbed Divine Will and raised his maximum concentration, the number of players that got resurrected and entered Lightforged City also increased. When the many members of Violet Sword and Azure saw Xiaofan and the others sitting in front of one of the statues on the city walls, they were bemused. I really don't know what those people from Zero Wing are doing. They're actually wasting time sitting before a statue. Do they not know that the peace outside has already shattered completely? Crimson Star could not help her puzzlement when she read the report her subordinate sent her regarding the activities of Zero Wing's members. Violet Sword's and Azure's members were all doing their best to improve their combat power in Lightforged City. Zero Wing's members, on the other hand, had wasted 2 whole days doing nothing. Aside from occasionally leaving their position to have a meal at Lightforged City's restaurants, they had spent all their time sitting before one of the statues erected on the city walls. Rather than coming here to train, Zero Wing's members looked as if they were on vacation. Zero Wing probably has its own considerations. After all, when it comes to peak experts, it is already superior to ordinary superpowers, Wildfighter said. Moreover, after the partnership this time, I heard that Azure plans to ally itself with Zero Wing. Afterward, Zero Wing will have a much smoother path ahead of it. Ally? So what if Azure allies with Zero Wing? Let alone Azure, even some super guilds are failing to cope with the current situation. How can Azure possibly have the time to help Zero Wing? Crimson Star said disdainfully. In addition, peak experts are no longer as effective as they were before. The various powers have already researched plenty of war weapons. The usefulness of Tier 3 players is continuously diminishing. Nowadays, Zerg tactics rule the battlefield. Since guild towns and cities no longer enjoyed the protection of NPC soldiers, guilds had lost their greatest assurance. Players no longer had to fear overly powerful NPC soldiers and were free to cause trouble inside guild towns and cities. This was especially good news for powerful experts and developing powers with limited territory. In fact, according to Violet Sword's intelligence network, over 200 guild towns on the western continent had switched owners since the activation of the Demon God's Chaos Expansion Pack. And while the various superpowers still hadn't suffered any losses due to this expansion pack, that was mainly because of the large number of Tier 3 experts and peak experts they possessed. Zero Wing, however, was significantly inferior to the various superpowers in this regard. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. This isn't something we need to concern ourselves about. Instructor Tori has just sent news that some of the secretly developing superpowers have started stirring recently, so once we complete our training here, he wants us to station our trump card legion in the 2 guild cities closest to level 100 maps as insurance, Wildfighter said. I understand. Once our time here is up, I'll bring the men over, Crimson Star replied, nodding. Meanwhile, as Crimson Star and Wildfighter were conversing, Xiaofan, who was sitting quietly before one of the city wall's statues, suddenly opened his eyes. At the same time, an invisible ripple spread out from his body, weakening the Divine Will's mental assault considerably. Success. Chapter 2648, Tier 4 Concentration. When the strange ripple appeared from Xiaofan's body, Aqua Rose and the others present promptly noticed it. At the same time, they felt a mental pressure from Xiaofan that they had never felt before. Although this mental pressure was far weaker than what the Divine Will statues radiated, it was inherently the same. Guild leader, did you break through? Aqua Rose could not help asking as she looked at Xiaofan. Although she understood that Xiaofan had achieved a breakthrough, she still wanted confirmation. The difficulty of raising concentration was far greater than she had expected. Even now, she could sense that she was still far from a breakthrough. Even Violet Cloud, whose mental condensation standard was second only to Xiaofan's, had a long way to go, 30% or so to reach the Tier 4 standard and its concomitant qualitative transformation. I've reached the Tier 4 standard already, Xiaofan said, nodding happily as he focused his mind on experiencing the changes brought about by having his concentration reach the Tier 4 standard. Tier 4. This was a realm that he was never able to reach in the past no matter what he did. Even though only his concentration had reached the Tier 4 standard, for now, it was already more than enough to excite him. In God's domain, Tier 4 was a major turning point for players, a far more important one than when players went from Tier 2 to Tier 3. One could say that more than 99% of Tier 3 players would never be able to reach Tier 4. In order to reach Tier 4, aside from sufficiently high combat standards and equipment standards, one also needed a lot of luck and fortuitous opportunities. If a player lacked any of these factors, the difficulty of reaching Tier 4 would increase exponentially. Now, with Xiaofan's concentration at the Tier 4 standard, his chances of attaining Tier 4 in the future had just increased significantly. Guild leader, what does it feel like to have Tier 4 concentration? Is the difference large? Yan Tianqing asked, curious. Upon hearing Yan Tianqing's question, everyone turned to Xiaofan with inquisitive eyes. It's large. It's very large, Xiaofan answered after giving the matter some thought. You can say that I've already reached a completely different level. The improvement of the concentration attribute would provide a significant increase in a player's control over their physical body and mana. The concentration attribute reaching the Tier 4 standard would even bring about a qualitative transformation. Take the Holy Annihilation mana technique for example. If executing Light Shadow cost him 10 points of concentration previously, then now, it required only 3 points. As for the concentration cost of executing bronze combat techniques, it had dropped even further. Now, he could basically use bronze combat techniques as if they were advanced combat techniques. In addition, even executing Tier 3 skills and spells at a 100% completion rate would probably no longer be difficult. Even breaking through the 100% threshold was entirely doable. Is the difference really that great? Aqua Rose could not help her incredulity. Although I do not wish to say this, the difference is, indeed, like heaven and earth. Right now, in a situation where I have the same basic attributes, I'm certain my current self can defeat my previous self in less than 10 moves, Xiaofan replied, chuckling when he saw the skeptical look Aqua Rose was giving him. Only after his concentration reached the Tier 4 standard did he truly understand how big the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 was. It was no wonder the Tier 4 experts in the past could trounce a group of Tier 3 peak experts, with some Tier 4 experts even able to capture a guild town single-handedly. The reason for this wasn't the powerful basic attributes Tier 4 players had but their control over their physical body and mana, which had reached a whole new realm. Even with the same physical body, Xiaofan had now doubled his combat power, at the very least. Moreover, the cost of exertion had been drastically reduced. Now, even Zerg tactics were useless against him. In his current state, he could truly destroy an army of players all by himself. The improvement is that much? Luofei was astonished by Xiaofang's example. Before, their guild leader could already be considered invincible among Tier 3 existences. After all, he had overwhelmed the ancient Secret Lands Tier 4 region chiefs. Now, however, he was claiming that his Tier 4 concentration would let him defeat his previous self in less than 10 moves. At this point, she no longer dared imagine how powerful he currently was. Even actual Tier 4 players might not be a match for him. Alright, we don't have much time left. Hurry up and continue absorbing the divine will. It'll be quite some time before you can enter here again, Xiaofan said, chuckling as he looked at everyone's yearning expressions. The alchemy array they used lasted only 7 days and had a 10-day cooldown. Even if everyone gained the right to stay in Lightforged City for as long as they wanted, they would still have to leave the city for at least 3 days before they could enter again. In addition, whenever they entered the ancient secret land, they had to spend a lot of time traveling to Lightforged City. Overall, they didn't really have much time to train here. At Xiaofang's reminder, everyone promptly resumed absorbing the Tier 4 Divine Will. The statue before them radiated. Although raising their concentration to the Tier 4 standard was incredibly difficult, just absorbing the Divine Will would still bring about a quantitative improvement to their concentration. Hence, they naturally couldn't waste the remaining time they had left in Lightforged City. Right, Violet, how close are you to achieving a breakthrough? Xiaofan asked as he turned to Violet Cloud, who was preparing to resume her training. Just a while ago, Violet Cloud had advanced to the 40-yard mark and was very close to reaching his training spot already. Hence, her absorption rate of divine will was just slightly slower than his. I feel that I need to raise my concentration by another 20% or so before I hit the Tier 3 limit, Violet Cloud replied after sensing the current state of her concentration. Only 20%? That quick? Her answer stunned Xiaofan. She was clearly still around 30% away from reaching the Tier 3 limit just now. He never thought that she could progress so rapidly. Taking out the 2 master concentration recovery potions he had left, he said, I still have 2 unused potions, take them. You're giving them to me? But what about everyone else? Violet Cloud automatically hesitated when she saw the 2 potions in Xiaofan's hand. The master concentration recovery potion was incredibly valuable. If she had to do quests and slowly accumulate the required contribution points to exchange for them, it would take ages before she would have enough points for 1 potion. If Xiaofan gave both of his remaining potions to her now, it would be unfair to everyone else. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, take them. You're the closest to achieving a breakthrough now. If your concentration can reach the Tier 4 standard, it'll be a great help to the guild. Aqua and the others will be happy to see that as well, Xiaofan assured her. Giving the potions to someone else might be fine if Violet Cloud's concentration was still a long way from reaching the Tier 4 standard. However, since she was only 20% short of reaching the Tier 3 limit and her divine will absorption rate was only slightly inferior to his own, the 2 additional master concentration recovery potions might help her cross the threshold. Knowing this, he would naturally give both bottles to her. After all, so long as Violet Cloud's concentration reached the Tier 4 standard, Zero Wing would gain another true powerhouse. Guild leader, I definitely won't disappoint you and everyone else. I'll make sure my concentration reaches the Tier 4 standard by the time we leave Lightforged City. Violet Cloud said with determination as she accepted the 2 potions. She then returned to her training spot and focused fully on resisting the approaching mental assaults. As for Xiaofan, he made his way to a quiet corner and shifted his attention to his bag space. Now that my concentration has reached the Tier 4 standard, it should be enough to accept this legacy. Xiaofan's eyes shone with anticipation as he looked at the gigantic memory crystal sitting in his bag space. Chapter 2649, Astonishing Ancient Legacy Lightforged City, Crimson Silver Hotel. As a hotel that catered to Lightforged City's nobles, the Crimson Silver Hotel was off-limits to ordinary players and NPCs. The cost of resting in this prestigious hotel was similarly far beyond that of ordinary hotels. Any normal room within the hotel cost 300 magic crystals or 10 contribution points to rent per day. Even Crimson Star and the others, who had become nobles of Lightforged City due to the Noble Authority token, were unwilling to rest here. At this moment, however, Xiaofan entered the hotel without hesitation, stunning the members of Violet Sword and Azure that saw him. Be it 300 magic crystals or 10 contribution points, neither was cheap. Paying such a high price just for some rest was an unnecessary extravagance. Renting a room in an ordinary hotel for the price of 30 magic crystals or 1 contribution point was more than enough. My lord, how may I be of service? A level 180 female attendant asked respectfully as she approached Xiaofan. I wish to rent a normal room here, Xiaofan said as he handed 300 magic crystals to the attendant. Very well, the female attendant said after verifying the payment. She then took out a crystalline key and gave it to Xiaofan, saying, My lord, here is your room key. You may choose any of the empty rooms upstairs. After accepting the key, Xiaofan promptly made his way to the second floor and entered one of the unoccupied rooms there. As soon as he entered the guest room, the mana density inside actually started rising rapidly. Just a short moment later, the ambient mana had more than doubled already. In addition, the mana here also gave him a soothing and calming feeling. Sure enough, the mana density here is much higher than in ordinary hotels. Xiaofan nodded in satisfaction when he sensed the room's environment. If he merely wanted some rest, he would have gone to an ordinary hotel. However, he didn't intend to rest, but to obtain the ancient legacy recorded inside the memory crystal. Hence, he could not afford to be careless. The noble hotel was much safer than the ordinary hotels in the city. This point was obvious just by looking at its attendants and guards. Every NPC here was at least a level 180, tier 3 NPC. They were not existences current players could afford to provoke. In addition, the noble hotel was protected by a ridiculously strong fourfold, defensive magic array. Under normal circumstances, even tier 5 existences would pose no threat to this magic array, let alone tier 3 and tier 4 existences. Now that Xiaofan no longer had to worry about external disruptions, he immediately took out the memory crystal from his bag and readied himself to read its contents. The memory crystal he obtained would remain in existence for only 2 natural days. He had already spent a lot of this time raising his concentration standard. Now, he had less than 3 hours left to read it. Now that my concentration has reached the tier 4 standard, I should be able to read it, right? Xiaofan could not help being nervous as he tapped his finger on the memory crystal. On this trip to the ancient secret land, his greatest harvest would definitely have to be the memory crystal. In fact, everything else he obtained from this trip couldn't even come close to half the value of this memory crystal. If he still couldn't read the information contained in it, then he really would die from heartache. In the next moment, the sound of a system notification entered his ears. System, warning. You have discovered a large memory crystal. According to your current concentration, if you read the recorded information completely, there is a very small chance you will enter a deep coma. Do you still wish to read the information? There's still a risk? Xiaofan was stunned when he saw the system notification. Just what is in this thing? Although the tier 4 standard was not the apex of God's domain, it was definitely above average. Even a king had to take tier 4 existences seriously. Now, however, despite his concentration having reached the tier 4 standard already, reading the recorded information still involved a bit of risk. This was simply unbelievable. Although there is a risk, I want to see what is recorded in this thing. Gritting his teeth, Xiaofan chose to read the information in the memory crystal. Memory crystals that contained ancient legacies were incredibly rare in God's domain. In fact, they could be counted on the fingers of one's hands. Previously, due to the very large chance of him falling into a deep coma, Xiaofan did not dare read the recorded information. However, now that the risk had become very small, he naturally had to try. After all, he wouldn't get another opportunity like this again in the future. After he chose to read the contents of the memory crystal, the large crystal in his hand started rapidly gathering mana from its surroundings. It then released a dazzling glow that brightly illuminated the entire room. Afterward, a beam of white light shot out from the memory crystal and into Xiaofan's forehead. For a time, Xiaofan sensed countless images and texts being transferred into his brain. The amount of the information was simply astonishing. It felt as if he had just plunged into a sea of knowledge. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. 1 hour. For the first half hour, Xiaofan still felt fine after receiving the copious information. However, after the transfer process continued for 40 minutes, he felt a stinging in his head as if someone was using a needle to poke his brain. Meanwhile, as time passed, this stinging sensation only intensified. After 80 minutes into the transfer process, Xiaofan felt as if his brain was about to explode. Right then, the beam the memory crystal released disappeared. Immediately afterward, the crystal shattered into countless fragments and vanished from the room. As for Xiaofan, his body swayed slightly, as his mind was in a mess. And when he opened his eyes, the world spun around him. How close! If the transfer process had continued for a few more minutes, I might have fainted. At this moment, Xiaofan felt that the system had tricked him. Despite the warning stating that there was only a very small chance for him to fall into a deep coma, he was clearly very close to breaching the mental protection system, which would have forced him into a deep coma for a very long time. Then, he would definitely die of regret. However, after resting for a few minutes, Xiaofan started feeling much better, the pain in his head having lessened significantly. Meanwhile, the information he had received also came into focus. This is a lie, right? A small, mobile fortress design? Stunned, Xiaofan wondered if the system was playing a joke on him when he looked at the images and texts displayed before him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU in God's domain, fortresses were much more valuable than towns. After all, aside from providing players with a place to rest, fortresses possessed far greater offensive and defensive capabilities than towns. They were shelters made for all kinds of warfare. Even a small fortress could easily fend off the assault of a large number of Tier 4 existences. Moreover, fortresses had much lower production costs and operation costs, hence, they had been highly popular among the various powers in the past. During Xiaofang's previous life, over 70% of the player shelters found in level 100+ maps were fortresses. However, the design currently displayed before him was a cut above even ordinary fortresses. In fact, even during his previous life, he had the fortune to witness such constructions only a few times. This construction was the mobile fortress. It was a fortress that could drive countless powers crazy.